They say you never forget the moment that you realize your worst nightmare has come true. For one father, that moment came in the form of a single phone call, just 9 minutes after he dropped off his 3-year-old daughter at the Babysitter's. 9 minutes. That's less than the time it takes to brew your morning coffee or scroll through your phone. 9 minutes in which his bright, playful little girl would go from yawning in his arms to unresponsive with her life hanging by a thread. This is a story of a toddler who already fought her way into this world after complications during birth, only to face something far more horrifying later on. It's a story of trust, shattered in the space of a single morning, a story that will make you question how well you really know the people you leave your child with. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 42 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I'm here with my co-host, my best friend in the whole world. Look at that smile, Jonathan.
Hi, Darklivity. It's the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness bring to light.
I can't believe it's the new year.
Here we go, 2025.
And that means new things to explore. And if you haven't heard about June's Journey and it's new to you, I suggest you check it out. They're the sponsor for today's video, and their support makes it possible for us to give back to causes like the Stephanie Pars Foundation, providing education, intervention, and support to families and individuals dealing with DV, and providing missing persons support. June's Journey is a really fun hidden object mystery game that whisks you away to the glamorous 1920s.
You'll follow June Parker as she digs into a thrilling murder mystery, her own sister's, and uncovers all sorts of dark family secrets along the way.
But what really sets June's Journey apart is the stunning scenes packed with hidden objects to find. And each new chapter has you searching for clues in beautifully detailed settings, and there's always something new to discover, whether you're remodeling and decorating your very own mansion or earning special rewards in game events.
And if you're feeling social, you can join a club or team up with other players to compete for prizes.
Or you can just enjoy the game solo at your own pace. I actually like to compete with Jon to see who can find more items and get more points. It's kind of the competitive side of me.
And I know that you also like to play it to unwind and just escape from all the heavy topics we cover and the research and writing.
That's true. I love breaking away and doing something that's fun yet challenging at the same time to kind of take a breather. It helps me focus better when I do come back to my work. So if you're ready to dive into something new, June's Journey is totally free to download. You can play it on iOS, Android, or even your PC. Just click the link below or on the QR code on the screen and start solving mysteries today. We want to thank June's Journey so much for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the case for today. Today we're covering the tragic case of Hannah Wesche and the shocking truth behind her final moments. Prepare yourselves, because once you hear what happened in this farmhouse daycare, you might never trust babysitters the same way again. March 8th. 2018. It started like any other weekday morning. Warm blankets, sleepy yawns, a father rushing to drop off his 3-year-old daughter before heading to work. But within 9 short minutes, something so catastrophic happened that it would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. By day's end, little Hannah was unresponsive, covered in bruises and clinging to life. The person entrusted to care for her, a babysitter named Lindsay Parton, would soon find herself at the center of a swirling storm of accusations, changing stories, and unimaginable grief. The location itself felt almost idyllic at first glance. Lindsay's cozy 2-car garage converted into a child-friendly haven, complete with arts and crafts, educational activities, and even nature walks to a nearby creek. Set amid a picturesque farm in Hanover Township in Hamilton, Ohio, you'd never expect this charming property to become the stage for a tragic puzzle of brutal injuries and desperate denials. Yet for Jason Wesche, Hannah's father, the farm next door was supposed to be a lifesaver. After years of hardship and not having a home, he finally had a steady job and a reliable neighbor who could watch his daughter during long workdays. Hannah's babysitter was supposed to offer safety and support. Instead, what looked like a blessing turned into his worst nightmare.
Here's where our story begins, with a bright little girl whose short life had already been marked by battles. She spent 92 days in the NICU after she had been exposed to narcotic substances in utero, then lived through not having a home alongside her father. Still, as young as she was known for her resilience and spark. Now, within a blink of an eye, Hannah was found with catastrophic head trauma. How did this tragedy unfold so quickly? Was it a tragic accident or something far darker? And could this seemingly perfect daycare provider truly be capable of harming a child she promised to protect? In this case, appearances will prove deceiving, and every minute of that morning's timeline matters. As we dive into the events of medical testimony, hidden bruises, and conflicting accounts that followed, we'll confront the unsettling question at the heart of the story. Who can you trust when your child's life hangs in the balance?
If there were ever a baby who fought her way into this world, it was Hannah Wesche, born on January 11th of 2015. Her tiny body was already stacked against impossible odds. It's like the universe decided to deal her a difficult hand right from the beginning. Her mother had been using heroin throughout her pregnancy, meaning Hannah arrived in the NICU with withdrawals and a host of life-threatening complications. Imagine this, a row of incubators, the steady hiss of ventilators, heart monitors beeping in unison, some quick, some slow. That sterile hospital smell is everywhere. In one of those incubators was Hannah, just days old, her chest rising and falling like the shallow waves of a tide. Nurses hovered over her, adjusting lines, checking vitals, whispering words of encouragement, as if hoping she could hear them. "You've got this, sweet girl."
92 days in that NICU. That's nearly 3 months where every single day teetered between hope and heartbreak. The doctors were not optimistic. The constant risk of infection, the breathing issues. Hannah's mother wasn't by her side like you'd imagine a parent might be. She had her own battle with addiction and legal troubles. The staff saw babies like Hannah far too often, tiny humans already burdened by an adult world's problems. Somehow, though, Hannah pulled through. The doctor's doubt slowly melted into guarded praise. She's a fighter, they'd say. Her vitals are stabilizing. Little by little, she inched her way to the place where they could take out some of those tubes. Eventually, they removed the feeding line, then the oxygen tube, until one day, she was strong enough to go home. Although home was an uncertain concept at that point.
That's right. As Hannah's health stabilized, the reality of her family life set in. Her mother was arrested and later convicted for heroin distribution. And suddenly Hannah was placed in the care of her father, Jason. He was already a father to 2 other children from previous relationships, which was complicated in its own right. He was also struggling with unemployment. He'd recently lost his job, meaning finances were tight to non-existent. So there he was, a newly single father of 3, including an infant who had just survived a NICU marathon. The mental, emotional, and financial toll on him was staggering. For the next 2 years, Jason and Hannah faced a level of instability that no parent or child should have to endure. Picture them living day-to-day couch surfing, sometimes sleeping in a car. When you're without a home, you can't even focus on tomorrow. Just figuring out where to spend the night becomes a full-time job.
And during this period, Jason managed to find a temporary solution. He took baby Hannah to his brother's house so she could sleep indoors, safe from the cold, while Hannah slept inside, warm, presumably in some sort of bassinet or borrowed crib. Jason spent his nights curled up in the backseat of his car.
I can't imagine being away from my baby at all, but Jason knew he was making those sacrifices for a reason.
And those nights in the car likely weighed heavily on Jason. Here's a man who wants to provide for his child, but life kept throwing him curveballs. And he had 2 other kids to think about as well. They were living elsewhere at the time until he could get his life together. In moments like this, you have to wonder what must have gone through Jason's mind.
Yeah, and I'm sure he was like, I have to do better for her, or all of them.
Or maybe he had thoughts like, I can't believe this is my reality. I mean, despite everything, there's still a glimmer of hope. Hannah had overcome so much medically, and Jason believed he too could claw his way to stability.
Eventually, Jason caught a break. He found a job at Smith Construction Corporation, and it wasn't just an ordinary job. It was the kind of opportunity that could be a lifeline, a stable paycheck, potential for longer-term employment. With the promise of steady income, Jason felt the tension in his chest start to loosen. Finally, he could see a way out of the spiral. But with a 12-hour workday from early morning until evening, childcare became a pressing issue. He needed someone reliable, someone who wouldn't judge him for maybe being behind on some bills, someone who'd care for Hannah like their own. And that's when he met Lindsay Parton, or rather when Lindsay drifted into his life like a godsend. Lindsay was married to one of Jason's coworkers, TJ Smith, and she ran a small daycare out of her home, a simple, informal setup. For Jason, it felt like the world was finally aligning. The best part was that this was the farmhouse next door to where he had finally found a home to rent, which was so convenient. Jason was living at 4004 Shank Road, a quaint home on a gravel country road. Lindsay's farmhouse was only 300 feet away at 4050 Shank Road, and Lindsay's 2 young daughters were around Hannah's age. She even had another daycare child or 2 that she was taking care of, so Hannah wouldn't be alone. Lindsay's place sounded perfect. She'd repurposed that 2-car garage into the snug, cozy daycare space. A couch here, a TV there, crafts and coloring books stacked in the corners, plus educational activities. And outside, a pond and farm animals. You can almost envision Hannah's wide eyes on the first day, seeing the animals up close and exploring the yard. For $35 a day, an amount that Jason still struggled with, but at least it was affordable. Lindsay would watch Hannah from morning until evening, and from the outside looking in, it seemed like a blessing. After such a rough couple of years, Jason must have felt relieved. At last, some stability for Hannah, some normalcy. She'd even have a chance to learn, play, and just be a kid. Let's pause and consider what this meant for Jason emotionally. He'd been to the brink with Hannah, from her initial terrifying days in the NICU to living out of his car. He'd seen her break every prediction and survive. Now, with a new job and a dependable neighbor, it seemed as though the clouds were finally clearing. He was proud of how far Hannah had come. He might have looked at her bruises, her cuts, and scrapes that were to come, like any rambunctious toddler might have, and thought, she's such a fighter.
And that's the thing about parents who've watched their children triumph over medical horrors. They tend to be fiercely protective, but they have to trust someone else eventually. Parents can't do everything alone, especially in a society demanding 12-hour shifts to pay the bills. And so Jason put his faith in Lindsay Parton. Hannah was not just any toddler. She had a resilience that might have made her a bit of an explorer. After all, if you survive through a rough birth and an extended NICU stay, you come out with a certain fighting spirit. Maybe that explains why she seemed fearless, playing around the farm, collecting rocks by the pond, or rummaging through Lindsay's supplies in the garage. Jason was determined to make up for lost time. He'd lost so much while without a home, 2 years of shifting from place to place, but now he was on the track to give Hannah something normal, a stable bedtime routine, regular meals, a safe environment. I mean, sure, he was behind on some daycare payments, but he had a plan to catch up, and by all accounts, it sure did look like they were past the worst of it.
So I was thinking about the $35 for an entire day of daycare. That's 12 hours long.
It's like $3 an hour.
$3 an hour. Wow. But if it's all you can afford and the person's willing to do it, that is pretty much a godsend.
Absolutely.
And from the outside, if you dropped into the scene, a father, a resilient 3-year-old who'd beaten all the odds, a neighbor with a cozy daycare, you would think it was the perfect scenario. A real small town neighbors helping each other vibe. Hannah had a place to learn her ABCs, do arts and crafts, and even join dance classes, all thanks to Lindsay's willingness to help out. But it's in these very moments when life feels like it's finally turning a corner that tragedy can strike. Because lurking beneath the surface were signs that not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Bruises, questionable explanations, and the uneasy feeling that maybe, just maybe, Hannah's caregiver wasn't telling the whole truth. We'd soon discover that the same child who had fought for her life in a hospital incubator would need someone to fight for her. So let's set the stage so you can truly envision this. If you were to pull into that driveway of Lindsay Parton's property for the very first time, you'd probably think this place is so charming. Her home sat on this picturesque farm, rolling fields, a few grazing animals, a barn or two in the distance, a front porch with rocking chairs. There was a creek nearby that the kids would visit for nature walks. Picture the sparkling water, the pebbles glistening under the sunlight, and children squealing with delight as they collected rocks to paint later. It sounds like a scene scene lifted from a kid storybook. Her converted two-car garage was essentially a kid cave. The cement floors were covered in foam mats and colorful rugs, a couch along one wall, a small TV on the other. There were a few shelves stacked with craft supplies, crayons, markers, jars of glitter, and bright construction paper. In the corner, you might spot a mini table with tiny chairs, perfect for a handful of toddlers. It was cozy, but it wasn't exactly state certified. Still, many parents prefer an intimate, at-home daycare setting, believing it can be more nurturing.
And Lindsay had the doors always open approach, like a reliable neighbor would, and that made it feel so warm and welcoming. She even offered breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner if Jason worked late.
But I wondered if he ever felt like this is too good to be true.
I mean, maybe, but if you have nothing to compare it to, you might not know the difference.
That's true. And why would someone question this woman's ability to care for a child? I mean, she had 2 kids of her own around the same age that were thriving, and she watched other kids there. But I don't know if anyone caught that Lindsay wasn't a licensed childcare provider. Not at all. She had been a bookkeeper, and then she was a Mary Kay consultant before her idea of opening a home daycare center, something she said she was working towards for her dream life. I guess she saw the appeal of staying home with her own kids and also getting paid to care for others. And to be fair, she did have an associate's degree in pre-childhood education. So when Jason moved in next door in a home that her longtime partner TJ Smith's dad owned, Lindsay saw him and Hannah, and she was quite taken aback by their appearance. Jason, she said, looked filthy, and little Hannah's clothes were wrinkled, her face stained with food and possibly Kool-Aid. And then TJ was the one who asked Lindsay to take on Jason's little girl Hannah so that Jason could work the long hours needed to complete his work. So that was kind of the catch here.
And that makes sense.
So let's go over Hannah's day-to-day at the daycare, which soon became a pattern for the 8 months she was in Lindsay's care. She would watch Hannah Monday through Thursday, anytime it wasn't raining, because when it rained, the construction company didn't work. So Jason didn't need daycare.
And what about Fridays?
Okay, Fridays. Fridays were reserved for Lindsay's children only, a day that she would spend with them at her father's office where she helped with bookkeeping duties. So Jason actually had a sitter that he would take Hannah to that was way further out of the way. But for relevant facts in this case, that person will not be important. On the days Hannah was with Lindsay, her schedule was as follows. 6 a.m., Jason would drop Hannah off because he leaves for work very early in the morning. And Lindsay would feed Hannah, maybe some scrambled eggs or cereal, and then encourage some coloring time. By midday, they would do a quick circle time for ABCs, shapes, and colors, the educational portion of the day. And then in the afternoon, the kids would head outside, roam in the yard, maybe feed the animals, go on a walk down to the creek for a little mini adventure. And then in the late afternoon, Lindsay would put on a show for the kids, let them watch a little TV while she prepped dinner or handled some chores.
Jason typically wouldn't pick up Hannah until after 6 or 7 p.m., meaning Hannah spent up to 12 hours in Lindsay's care. 12 hours can be an eternity for a toddler, but for Jason, this was the trade-off of having a stable job that demanded long shifts, and Lindsay seemed willing to handle it without complaint.
But after just a few months in Lindsay's care, Jason began noticing that Hannah was coming home with bruises. And at first, they were small, maybe on her shin or her forearm. Toddlers get bumps and bruises all the time, right? They trip. They jump off the couch. They do toddler things. So Jason brushed it off as a normal thing that kids would do, especially considering the farm environment. But as time went on, the bruises got more frequent and varied in location. Some were on her chest, some behind her ears, places not typically explained by a simple fall. When he asked Hannah what happened, she'd mostly pair it what Lindsay had told him earlier. Oh, I was climbing, or I fell off a toy. Hannah was 3. She didn't exactly articulate much beyond that. And Lindsay always had an explanation ready. Oh, she wouldn't sit still during dance class, or she was playing rough with the other kids, or maybe she ran into a corner of a table while chasing the cat. Something about the tone, though, almost calm and rehearsed. But as a busy parent like Jason, he probably sounded perfectly plausible. Kids do weird, clumsy stuff.
It might help to illustrate how Lindsay addressed these concerns. So this is a quick hypothetical text exchange.
Right. This is just an example of the way Lindsay would explain Hannah's marks and bruises, but it's not verbatim, although they did text back and forth about these things. So we're going to provide an example of how one of these conversations would go. John's going to read Jason's part and I will be Lindsay. It would go something like this.
Jason would text around 6:45 p.m. and he would say, "Hey, I see a bruise on Hannah's chin. She says she hit a step. Is everything okay?"
Lindsay would text back a couple minutes later, "Yeah, she was just climbing on that little ride-on toy in the garage. I told her to be careful, but she slipped forward, bonked her chin, she cried, but I put some ice on it. She was fine 5 minutes later, I promise."
All right, just making sure. She's got a couple others on her knees too.
Oh, that's from earlier this morning. She and the other kids, they were just jumping on that mini trampoline. Typical toddler stuff, So you can see how these conversations would go back and forth. And sometimes these conversations would happen in person when Jason would go pick Hannah up. And each time, Lindsay's tone was mild, even cheerful. No cause for alarm at all. Just kids being kids. The consistency and detail in her explanations could make any parent think, oh, that is just normal toddler chaos. But a pattern was forming. Almost every day, there was a new bruise or mark. Of course, from Hannah's perspective, how else was she supposed to communicate this? She just repeated Lindsay's words, trusting the adult who cared for her for 12 hours a day. And if there was something sinister going on, she wouldn't have the vocabulary to articulate that. Meanwhile, Jason, fresh off a life of chaos himself, was grateful enough for the fact that he had help, so he might have overlooked some red flags. The question lingers though, why didn't Jason act sooner? Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe a desire to believe that everything was fine, maybe just relief that Hannah had a roof over her head. Also, single parents in dire situations can feel they have limited options. If Lindsay was plan A, then maybe there really wasn't a plan B. I mean, sure, he had that Friday sitter, but it could have been out of his price range. And we know it wasn't ideal as having a caretaker right next door.
Right, so the more time Hannah spent at Lindsay's, more unsettling details emerged. Some days, Hannah seemed extra tired, almost lethargic by pickup time. Lindsay chalked it up as a long day of play. And other times, Jason noticed faint bruises forming in odd places, like around her collarbone or near her ears. And Lindsay said they're from poking around with the other kids or playing tag in the yard.
But I was going to say, I know we've heard about the ears a couple times. That's a very odd placement for a bruise. I mean, from merely playing around, how would you get a bruise like in the back of your ear?
Right. I mean, kids are short, right? But if you look closer around the cozy daycare garage, you might notice corners that were a bit sharper and a step leading up to the house that a toddler can trip on, or a few pieces of furniture that weren't exactly kid-proofed.
Right after all, this is a house with a dedicated daycare room, but it's still a normal house with normal things you would find inside. So you're right. It wasn't exactly kid-proof everywhere. So maybe you'd think, oh yeah, they could just bonk their head on that corner of a desk. And again, this was not a licensed facility. And financial tension was definitely in the mix as well. And he often fell behind on that just $35 per day. It might not sound like much in the grand scheme of childcare. I mean, we know how expensive it can be, but when you're living paycheck to paycheck with multiple children, it can add up really fast. Lindsay, by contrast, had her own bills, her family needs, and presumably some frustration. Because while she was glad to help, this was also her livelihood. And it's not unusual for a daycare provider to get irritated if a parent is consistently missing payments. So the question is, did that tension brew resentment?
I don't know, it's hard to say, but it is another piece in the puzzle that might have set the stage for conflict.
Exactly. And neighbors and acquaintances who saw Lindsay with the kids out by the creek thought that she was great with them. She would point out insects, help them find pretty rocks, let them splash a bit in the shallow waters. It's those snapshots that make it so hard to reconcile what would eventually be revealed. Because if Lindsay was truly harming Hannah, wouldn't people have seen it in broad daylight?
Possibly not.
I mean, it's true. Some people who harm others, they know how to present a nurturing front to outsiders.
And there were likely smaller incidents along the way, moments when Hannah cried unexplainably or acted fearful. But if Lindsay immediately comforted her or brushed it off with, "Oh, she's just having a cranky day," who would question that? Jason was also working, so by the time he picked up Hannah, he might have been too exhausted to read subtle cues from his daughter.
That's true, because there are a lot of times that happens. Like you'll hear a baby crying and then, the mom, oh, she's teething. But it could be something else. In an alternative universe, if Hannah had a stable, financially comfortable family, if Lindsay was a fully certified daycare provider, if there were more thorough check-ins, maybe everything would have been looked at differently. But in this reality, the trust Jason had in Lindsay was overshadowing any small pangs of worry. And honestly, you don't want to think that the person who you just trusted to care for your child is harming them, especially when you were the one who put that child in their care.
By the time early March of 2018 rolled around, something else was happening. Hannah occasionally complained of headaches, which Lindsay again excused as she's just overly tired, or she might have bumped her head earlier in the day. And it wasn't just Jason taking note. He occasionally mentioned these bruises to coworkers, maybe even to family members. He'd get the same response: "Kids are always falling," or "Try not to worry too much," often leading him back to the false sense of security.
Hindsight is 20/20, as people will say. And later, you can see how each bruise, each suspicious explanation built a pattern. The first week of March, there was a scratch on Hannah's chin and some oddly placed bruises on her chest and even a black eye, each with an excuse by Lindsay. Oh, she fell while she was playing in the driveway, or she slipped off a toy and fell on the ground.
And like we keep saying, it's easy to accept the caretaker's reassurances.
And Lindsay might have seemed genuinely concerned, even sweet about Hannah's well-being. She texted Jason updates all the time. "Oh, Hannah's napping," or "She just ate lunch. We had mac and cheese. She's so cute." Painting a picture of everything being so normal. And all these pieces of the puzzle, the cozy farm, the 2-car garage daycare, the daily bruises, the run-of-the-mill excuses, were about to collide one early morning. Hannah arrived at Lindsay's as usual, tired but affectionate, asking for one more kiss and hug from her dad. Fast forward just minutes later, and she'd be on the brink of death. Every second will matter, and every bruise will suddenly take on a deeper meaning when an emergency call starts coming in. It's 6:50 a.m. and Jason is already in full dad mode. He's helping Hannah get a bowl of cereal, brush her teeth, and get her coat on and her shoes on by the door before loading his 3-year-old daughter into his car. Usually, she would actually sit on her dad's lap and pretend that she was driving. Yes, maybe it seems a little risky, but we're talking about a 300-foot distance. And it was just a playful routine that they had together, but not today. Instead, she's bundled in a blanket in the backseat of her dad's car, still half asleep from the early morning wake up. Most toddlers her age would still be snoozing or just waking up to cartoons and cereal, but Hannah's day started much earlier. Jason, getting ready to leave, sends a quick text message to Lindsay at 6:52 a.m. He texts, "Getting ready to head over," and Lindsay responds just seconds later with, "Okay." The drive should only take about a minute or two at most.
By 6:54 a.m., Jason would have pulled up into Lindsay's driveway. The property is still a bit dark, just the early daylight lighting his path. He scoops Hannah up, blanket and all, into his arms. She's still groggy, resting her head on his shoulder.
Inside, Lindsay's day is beginning as well. She's with one of her daughters who got up early that morning when TJ got up for work, and they're sitting on the couch in the living room watching out the front window for Jason to arrive. Once there, Jason enters the garage through the side door of the house and places Hannah down in the home. Hannah says to her dad, "Daddy, one more kiss?" She was mumbling this in a still half-asleep toddler state. Jason leans down and obliges, giving her another peck on the forehead. It's a small routine. Hannah would often cling to him, not quite ready to let go. She repeatedly wanted another and another kiss. She really didn't want him to leave. And it really does make me sad picturing that morning and picturing her doing that over and over again, because it wasn't like other mornings. She kept repeating it. She was like, "No, one more kiss, one more kiss." And in Lindsay's version of events, this one more hug and one more kiss moment is something she would later confirm. It's a critical detail. It establishes that Hannah was awake, talking, and responsive at drop-off. There's no sign of immediate distress. Jason left. He knew he couldn't linger because time is money on a construction site. He heads back out to do a quick switch to his work truck, often parked on the property next door. It only takes him a few minutes, and he's on his way. In a perfect world, that would be the entire morning routine. Simple, unremarkable. But on this day, the next few minutes become critical. Between 6:54 a.m. and 7:02 a.m., something unimaginable occurs.
Jason was driving to the end of the road where the construction company kept the trucks. He climbed into his work truck and turned it on and let it warm up because it was a cold morning. While he's doing this, his phone registered a missed call. It's Lindsay at 7 o'clock and 47 seconds. He misses this call as he's concentrating on his vehicles, and as seconds tick by, Jason glances down at his phone screen to see Lindsay's name. He's confused why she would be calling so soon after he dropped off Hannah, so he redials immediately.
The call connects at 7:01 and 24 seconds. He hears Lindsay's voice, breathless, definitely alarmed. She says something along the lines of, "Jason, you have to come back. Hannah's collapsed. I don't know what's going on." Less than 9 minutes since that final kiss. What could have possibly happened in such a short window of time? Jason knew that Hannah wasn't in distress just moments ago. Lindsay's answers are frantic. She says Hannah just went down. She's not breathing well. Something is very wrong.
By 7:02 and 51 seconds, only about a minute later, Lindsay calls 911. Over a 13-minute conversation, she explains that Hannah had fallen the previous day, speculating that perhaps it caused a concussion or a slow brain bleed. Her tone indicates she's sure that this must be the explanation. She also mentions that Hannah has had a rough week, bruises, behavior issues. Lindsay's voice on the call oscillates between urgency and rationalization. "I think this might be a delayed effect from yesterday's injury," she said. Let's listen to a portion of that call now.
I babysit kids.
Yeah.
And he just dropped her off, and all of a sudden she just passed out.
Who's passed out?
The little girl, she's 3. She felt pretty bad yesterday, and she was fine. And then all of a sudden he dropped her off this morning, and she walked in and she kind of passed out. She went limp.
Okay.
I don't know.
Are you with her now?
Yes, and so was her dad. I called her. Yes, hurry, she's bad. There's something wrong.
Okay. Is she awake right now?
Yes.
No, stay on the line with me. I have to ask you a few questions while my partner gets the medics dispatched. Okay, is she breathing?
Yes, in and out.
Okay.
Yes, in and out. I don't know what's wrong.
Okay, is her breathing completely normal?
Oh, yes, almost gone. Hurry, please.
Okay, they're on the way right now. I'm just asking you a few questions so while they're on the way.
Let her lay down. I think it's better. I don't know what's better.
Okay, lay her down on her back.
That's out.
Lay her down on her back and let her head tilt back. Okay. Is she still unconscious, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, she's unconscious. She's her eyes are open and she's like gasping for air.
Okay.
Can't wake up. Yes, there she goes.
Okay. Is she on her back right now?
Yes, she's on her back. She's sitting on herself.
Okay. Kneel right next to her and look at her mouth for can you feel her vomit?
Her daddy's here too. She's just gasping.
Okay. Is there anything in her mouth?
No, there's nothing in her mouth.
Okay. Now place your hand on her forehead and other hand on under her neck, then tilt her head back.
Okay.
Put your ear next to her mouth. Can you feel or hear anything?
Yes.
Yes, is she breathing?
Yes, I feel some air coming out of her mouth, yes, and she's gasping for air. She's doing her breath.
Okay. Just a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, is her breathing effective?
Yeah, actually, I mean, she's still breathing.
Is she gasping or?
She's gasping, yes, she's gasping.
Okay.
I gotta put clothes on. Oh my God. I cannot believe this is happening. She felt really bad yesterday when we were playing here in the garage. And she has a bruise on her face and on her chin, and I thought she was fine, and she was up and playing yesterday.
I want you to stay right with her and make sure her head is carefully tilted back and check her breathing often.
Sir, I just had a robe on. I'm trying to throw clothes on really quick.
That's good. That's okay.
God.
All right. Can you give me the phone to someone who's with her?
I'm literally throwing my shirt on as I'm running back to the garage. He dropped her off.
Is she in the garage right now?
Yes.
Okay. Is the garage open?
Yes, the back door's open. Come around the side.
Okay. What's your name?
Lindsay.
Lindsay, what's your last name?
Parton.
Is that her crying in the background?
No, that's my little one.
Okay.
Okay, I'm right.
Ma'am?
You okay? No, she's not okay.
Lindsay, what's going on?
Okay, she's just still doing the gasping for air.
Okay.
She barely breathes.
Okay. Is her head tilted back and is she on her back?
Yes, her head is back. Look at her back, baby. Yeah.
Okay. And there's nothing in her mouth, correct?
No, there's not.
Hey.
Hey, wake up. Hey, breathe.
Okay.
So, breathe.
Breathe, baby.
Breathe. You're okay. You're okay.
Okay. Just make sure her head is tilted back. That will assure that her airway is open.
Hey, girl. Okay,
Breathe. Hey. Okay. Come on. So the medic is on the way, and we've got the deputy on the way as well.
All right.
And so the deputy will get there and help you out too.
Hey,
How's her breathing right now?
it's off and on. Hey,
Off and on?
she'll stop breathing for a second, then she'll take one big gasp, and then, hey, what's the matter?
fucking shock or something.
I don't know what the fuck could be wrong with her.
I don't know. She was fine. Who just walked in the house?
She got up, brushed her teeth. I don't know. Easy.
You're okay. I love you.
Anna.
I love you, Buttercup.
Hey,
Hey, wake up. Here we go. Here we go.
Is she waking up now?
no.
No, she's still
No.
doing the same thing, but she's,
Paramedics are dispatched immediately. Hannah's condition is described as dire. She's collapsed, she's unresponsive, struggling to breathe, and sadly, I could hear those little sharp breaths in the background of that call. And once help arrived, suddenly the garage that was once a cozy daycare scene transformed into the site of a medical emergency. Some medical insight here on child head trauma. For children, head trauma can be instantly catastrophic. The brain is still developing. The skull is much more fragile, and any significant impact can lead to swelling or internal bleeding. A slow subdural hemorrhage, if indeed that is what's happening here, as Lindsay suggested, it can accumulate over hours or even days, yet it typically presents with escalating symptoms like lethargy, vomiting, or headaches before a complete collapse. But was Hannah showing any of those signs before? It seemed like she had been alert enough to ask for extra kisses.
At that time, Lindsay's on the phone, and when Jason got there, he saw Hannah sprawled on the floor in a room in between the garage and the kitchen, her eyes partially open but unfocused. She's barely breathing now, and her skin is clammy. Jason is panicked. He tries calling out Hannah's name. He can't make sense of this sudden shift. Hannah would take small breaths when Jason said her name, and meanwhile, Lindsay's giving some version of events on the phone. She claims Hannah asked for a donut and to sit on the couch. She took off her coat and then just fell forward.
When the paramedics finally pull in, the sense of urgency is obvious. Lights flashing. They hurry to the scene. Time is of the essence with pediatric emergencies. Within minutes, lack of oxygen can cause irreversible brain damage. They find Hannah lying on a couch in the garage where Jason positioned her after he picked her up. She's not responsive. Her breathing is shallow and ragged. They check her vital signs, heart rate, oxygen level, pupil response. The results are grim. She needs immediate hospital intervention. In the midst of the chaos, Lindsay's still explaining this fall from yesterday, insisting that must be what's causing Hannah's state. A paramedic is doing a quick initial exam, lifting Hannah's eyelids, seeing if her pupils react, and one of her pupils had blown out. That is a surefire sign of a massive head injury. They already suspect something more sinister than a delayed concussion from a mild fall. They see bruises everywhere, some fresh, some in various stages of healing. For them, alarm bells go off. This is no ordinary accident. It's not an accident at all.
Hannah is rushed into the ambulance on a stretcher, and Jason tries to climb in with her, but the paramedics ask him to stand back. He's emotional, and he's worried about his daughter, but the paramedics need space to work. They have to get an IV started, check airway management, and prep her for transport to the nearest emergency department at Fort Hamilton Hospital.
This is the type of situation where a paramedic might comment quietly to another, "We've got multiple contusions. This could be non-accidental trauma." Now, that term right there is a term that's whispered in emergency circles when purposeful children mistreatment is suspected. Jason jumped into his car and followed the ambulance as it sped away.
And now Lindsay finds herself fielding questions from paramedics and possibly officers, since it's evident she is running a daycare that is not approved by the state. She seems unsure of how exactly Hannah fell. Earlier, she told the 911 operator that she thought Hannah was dealing with a delayed concussion from the day before, and now she's mentioning that Hannah asked for a donut, took off her coat, and collapsed. Later, she'll mention a slip on concrete steps. In this moment, it's pure chaos. Everyone's worried about saving Hannah's life more than dissecting Lindsay's statements.
And let's talk about real-time confusion for a moment. It's not uncommon for someone under stress to jumble up details. But the critical difference here is that Lindsay shifts her story within just a few minutes. The medics notice the discrepancies. When you're dealing with an injured child, professionals are trained to be on high alert because of the likelihood of mistreatment. So they wondered, did Hannah fall on a toy or a step? Or was it really a leftover injury from yesterday? Which is it? Which story is the truth?
For Jason, whatever trust he had left in Lindsay was eroding fast, replaying all the excuses in his head, her half-formed explanations. But at this moment, he is way too consumed by fear for Hannah to analyze any of this clearly.
As the ambulance rushes Hannah to the hospital, let's pause for a moment to understand the seriousness of pediatric head injuries. Young children have proportionally larger heads compared to their bodies, meaning a blow to the head can be much more severe than for an adult. Subdural hematomas, bleeding between the brain and the skull, can often occur from violent shaking, a significant impact, or both. They can also present almost immediately with symptoms like vomiting, unresponsiveness, or even seizures. In rare cases, a slower bleed can cause progressive symptoms, but the abrupt collapse that we see here is more consistent with an acute event, something that happened right then, not 24 hours ago or longer, and that will become even more important going forward. In short, the speed at which Hannah deteriorated implied something far more immediate than a mild leftover injury from the previous day. But could she have been walking, talking, and hugging her dad if she had a major bleed prior to drop-off? Most experts will say no. She would have been showing obvious signs, severe headaches, extreme drowsiness, or worse, and she would experience these far earlier. But wasn't she complaining of headaches before this happened? Wasn't she laying there in the back of her dad's car, which was not the norm before she even got to Lindsay's? These were details that Jason himself provided and that Lindsay wouldn't have even known about.
Well, this was the first few minutes of investigation, and for any parent listening, it's nearly impossible to imagine dropping off a seemingly perfectly fine child and getting a call minutes later that they've collapsed. How could everything go wrong so fast?
That's what I keep asking myself, not only as a parent, but just knowing about stories that have happened or things that I've seen. How could this happen so quickly? How could she be kind of normal and then not?
This short window of time from 6:54 to just 7:02 a.m. would become the linchpin of the entire case. Investigators would later focus on the fact that Hannah was clearly responsive at drop-off. Less than 9 minutes later, she's in critical condition. If Hannah truly had an old injury, how did she manage to act so normal for days?
The suspicion, of course, points towards an acute event that happened after Jason left, which places it squarely in Lindsay's hands, or at the very least, in Lindsay's presence. And that's where the narrative starts to tear at the seams.
At the hospital, doctors would discover a string of injuries, bruises in different stages of healing, a severe subdural hemorrhage. And this collectively painted a grim picture, non-accidental trauma. But in the very moment around 7:15 or maybe 7:20 a.m., with sirens blaring and paramedics trying to stabilize Hannah, the only immediate question is now, will she survive?
By the time Hannah arrived, the situation was nothing short of a full-blown crisis. Paramedics had been working on her in the back of that ambulance, checking vitals, administering oxygen, trying desperately to keep her stable. They'd already relayed the critical details en route. A 3-year-old, unresponsive, multiple bruises noted, possible head trauma. Caretaker stories suggest a bad fall the day before, but paramedics suspect something more. The ER doors burst open and Hannah was rushed on a gurney inside. Hospital staff mobilized instantly. A respiratory therapist prepared a ventilator. A trauma nurse swiftly cut away Hannah's clothes to examine her torso. Within seconds, the medical team saw a chilling mosaic of bruises. some fresh, some older, in different stages of healing. Eyes darted around. They knew this was not your average playground tumble. One paramedic remained close to Hannah, relaying everything he'd observed. She was found on a couch, shallow and irregular breathing, unresponsive. The babysitter mentioned something about a previous head injury, but the bruises, they're all over. He avoided saying the word abuse right there, but it was loud and clear.
Dr. Nguyen was on duty when Hannah arrived. He quickly ordered a series of emergency checks. Airway. Hannah needed immediate intubation. That's a tube down her throat to maintain her breathing. Circulation. They checked her blood pressure and heart rate. Neurological signs. Pupil reflexes and any sign of awareness. Alarms went off in his mind. Hannah was too limp. Her body unresponsive in a way that didn't align with a minor tumble the day before. Dr. Nguyen had worked enough pediatric cases to recognize the telltale signs of severe head trauma. Dr. Nguyen said, "Let's get a CT scan, neck and face included. Call the pediatric ICU in Cincinnati Children's. We might need to airlift her."
And they did airlift her. Amid the commotion, Jason was frantic to see his daughter, as you can imagine. And the nurses tried to explain they were in the middle of life-saving measures.
Once Hannah was stabilized enough for the CT scan, Dr. Nguyen and his team got a clear look at the extent of her injuries. Blood trapped between the brain and skull was pressing on her brain tissue. This was the type of hemorrhage commonly associated with violent shaking or blunt force impact. In a matter of minutes, Hannah's case escalated from possible concussion to very likely child mistreatment. The staff recognized the pattern all too well. Shaken baby syndrome or repeated physical trauma can create this type of head injury.
A paramedic who'd handled Hannah gave a statement to the hospital authorities and later testified in court. He said he immediately suspected Hannah was in an unsafe environment. The paramedic stated, "The second I saw the pattern of bruises, especially around her chest, her chin, and her eyes, I knew we had to get her out of there fast." The caretaker was talking a mile a minute about a toy slip the day before, but none of it explained what I was seeing. He noted how Jason appeared distraught. Meanwhile, Lindsay was rattling off details of a supposed fall and Hannah having a rough week. I thought that was weird too, like a baby having a rough week. She sounded so sure it was all from a simple accident. Yet the paramedics weren't convinced. While Hannah was rushed off for urgent care, being airlifted to the children's hospital, Jason followed in his car, rushing to be by her side. Meanwhile, Lindsay, she remained at the hospital for initial questioning. Investigators were already being looped in because the doctors had basically raised the red flag for potential child mistreatment. We can't keep saying the A word, but I think you know. In these early conversations, Lindsay denied any knowledge of what really happened, repeating her same story over and over again. Lindsay would tell them she fell the day before. She was standing on a toy and it slipped out from under her. I think it caused a concussion or a slow brain bleed. She had a bruise from that. But the more Lindsay spoke, the more details seemed to contradict one another. She mentioned Hannah was kind of grumpy that morning, that she asked for a donut and then just collapsed. But which was it? A leftover injury or a new fall this morning? It keeps changing. Lindsay was scrambling. She's like, "Well, both, I guess. She fell yesterday, but I also told her to take off her coat this morning and she just went down." Already the investigators sensed that Lindsay's account wasn't lining up with the nature of Hannah's injuries.
And it didn't take long for Lindsay's story to shift again, especially under the stress of police questioning. One paramedic overheard Lindsay telling a story to the social worker that Hannah got tangled in a blanket and hit her head on a step.
I'd like to also mention something about these trauma interviews because in genuine accidents, caretakers generally have a consistent timeline. Okay, they recall a single event, they know how it happened, how the child reacted, but Lindsay's narrative seemed to shift with each new question, and that is a red flag to law enforcement. I couldn't help but wonder if this had something to do with the fact that she wasn't actually a professional caretaker. And what I mean by this is that she has no real training other than possibly that degree that I mentioned earlier in pre-education, but no recent formal training. Though I'm sure some of you may be thinking, well, she has 2 kids of her own. It's not the same. You don't care for your own children the same way. And I mean that in both caring for them, like keeping them safe, but caring, as in loving them. And I can't shake hearing Lindsay's voice on that 911 call. I love you, Buttercup. It just seems really strange.
Once Hannah was at the children's hospital, she was rushed into emergency brain surgery. In these critical moments, surgeons worked to relieve pressure on her skull, hoping to prevent irreversible brain damage. If they couldn't reduce the swelling, Hannah could slip away at any second. And outside, Jason had fear etched into every line of his face as he spoke with the detectives and medical professionals back and forth.
At the same time, Lindsay was giving her evolving versions, and investigators were already collecting statements from everyone else, the paramedics, the doctors at the first hospital, and Jason himself. Jason was bombarded by the same questions over and over again. Did Hannah complain of headaches? Did you notice bruises? Did you see your babysitter discipline her? And in the hallway outside the ICU, you would see a mix of scrubs and uniforms, nurses whispering about the severity of Hannah's trauma, detectives quietly conferring with one another, concluding that Lindsay's inconsistent explanations just were not adding up. Jason overhearing bits and pieces, grappling with the horrifying possibility that this woman may have hurt his daughter. And Lindsay was cornered by the mounting evidence, still denying any wrongdoing, just repeating that Hannah was always falling or misbehaving. So now it's Hannah's fault, right?
At some point in these early hours, they'd photograph every bruise, every contusion, preparing for the likelihood that Hannah might not survive, and they'd need all the evidence documented just in case. Hannah's condition, according to the CT scan, was grim. After emergency neurosurgeons performed surgery to relieve the cranial pressure, she was placed in a medically induced coma to give her brain time to heal. But would she ever wake up?
Remember, doctors and nurses are mandatory reporters of suspected child mistreatment. They don't need conclusive proof that something happened. They just need a reasonable suspicion. Given the extent of Hannah's injuries, it was beyond reasonable. It was glaring. The hospital staff had no choice but to alert law enforcement, which we know they did, as well as Child Protective Services, and potentially the district attorney's office.
And all the while, Lindsay is sticking to her guns, even saying that it took Jason over 7 minutes to drive there. It should have been sooner, implying that maybe Jason had done something. By the end of the first day, Hannah was in ICU. Her life was hanging by a thread. The investigators had Lindsay in an interview room at the sheriff's office now with her conflicting stories on record. And now her daycare utopia was under the spotlight as a potential crime scene. After an hour and a half of questioning Lindsay, she was allowed to go home. She truly thought this was it. Everything was fine. She gave her statement, and now she could get back to her normal life. She even tried to go see Hannah at the children's hospital, but by that point, she was denied access to Hannah's ward. When she asked Jason what was going on, he told her he thought Hannah may have suffered a brain aneurysm.
Now, it's important to point this out. With Jason's limited medical knowledge, when he heard that there was a brain bleed, his first thought was an aneurysm. Because again, he's trying to understand how this could have happened. So that's what he was relaying to Lindsay in that moment. And this is going to come back up. So that's why I wanted to make it clear. When Lindsay finally returned home that evening, her boyfriend's mom, Paula Smith, noticed that Lindsay was frantic. While Lindsay was away, Paula had tried to clean up by just picking up things around the house. But Lindsay wasn't happy about this. She wanted everything, including the toy train that she said that Hannah had fallen from the day before, put back exactly where it had been found. Paula remembered Lindsay saying, "I'm in big trouble." You think? The first time Lindsay came down to the Butler County Sheriff's Department, she did it willingly. But the next day, she was called back for a second interview with 2 new detectives, and this time their tone had shifted.
From the start, the detectives were more aggressive, and by the end of the interview, detectives had heard enough. They knew they had their prime suspect, and Lindsay was arrested at her home at 9 a.m. the following day.
Later, police discovered that the day prior to the incident, at 8:48 a.m., she conducted a phone search for how to get rid of a bruise, and then deleted that search. And later at 2:56 p.m., she searched for what essential oil is good for bruises and is vapor rub good for bruises. These searches raised significant concerns about her account of these events. I mean, if they were just accidental bruises, you don't Google those things. It's like she wanted to cover the bruises up. And deleting your searches, I mean, that is suspicious. At the hospital, Hannah was hooked up to all kinds of machines that were keeping her alive. But after a week, doctors informed Jason that she was brain dead and nothing could be done to save her life. I really cannot even begin to imagine what he was going through getting that news after this family had already been through so much. On March 18th, just 10 days after Hannah was rushed to the hospital, she was taken off life support and sadly pronounced dead.
After news of Lindsay Parton's arrest and Hannah's death spread far and wide, parents across the nation were left questioning, how well do I really know who's watching my child? And Jason, Hannah's mother, Adrian, and their families were left grieving. It's not just about physical injuries, it's the betrayal of trust. They even turned to social media to share their daughter's vibrant life with the world. They posted photos and videos that revealed a bubbly, funny, and mischievous little girl who had so much life ahead of her.
In one picture, she sat in her stroller, grinning from ear to ear while wearing oversized glasses that dwarfed her small little face. Another captured her playful spirit during bath time, with her hair sticking up wildly in all directions. In another, she proudly wore a green shirt that read Miss Sassy Pants, which was a perfect fit for her personality.
Videos showed even more of Hannah's charm. She was seen bouncing on a trampoline. In another cute moment, she played peekaboo with her older sister, giggling with pure joy. Other clips captured her singing songs, dancing, and just being her silly, delightful self.
Yeah, these are really cute and endearing moments. They were glimpses into Hannah's little life, and they were joined by heartbreaking images of her struggle. Jason and Adrian also posted photos of their daughter lying in a hospital bed, her small frame covered in pink blankets. A life-size Minnie Mouse balloon floated beside her, a tragic reminder of the cheerful, playful child that she had once been just days before. At one of Lindsay Parton's first court appearances, Jason spoke through his pain, describing his daughter as a great little girl, and now she was gone.
And once the autopsy was completed, which we'll discuss soon, Dr. Dorothy Dean, a forensic pathologist from Hamilton County, reported Hannah's official cause of death was determined to be traumatic brain injury due to blunt force trauma to the head, and it was ruled a homicide. Hannah's autopsy report documented a long list of injuries so severe that it took over 2 pages. Once Hannah's death was confirmed to be a homicide, the charges against Lindsay were upgraded from child endangerment to murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 4 counts of child endangerment. Lindsay, however, maintained her innocence, pleading not guilty, and was released on a $75,000 bond.
So she got to go home to her children while she awaited trial. Now it's April 3rd of 2019, over a year since little 3-year-old Hannah was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening head injuries. For those who loved her, it felt like a lifetime had passed. And for Lindsay Parton, the babysitter now charged with murder, these 12 months likely felt like a slow, suffocating dread. And now it was time for everything to come out into the open. The bruises, the timeline discrepancies, all of it. Walking into the courtroom, you'd see a row of spectators, journalists, concerned citizens, family members, maybe even the occasional true crime consumer. There was a hush as the bailiff called the court into session. Lindsay sat at the defense table, her hair neatly tied back into one of those half ponytails, her face pale. She glanced around nervously. On the prosecution side, you can feel the tension. They're there to seek justice for Hannah.
The courtroom was tense as Lindsay, who had been living with her parents since her release, sat with her family's support. But the toll of the case was evident. Though her family stood by her, Lindsay's relationship with her then-boyfriend TJ, who had been with her at the time of Hannah's death, had fallen apart. He refused to testify in Lindsay's defense, and the two never spoke again. Assistant prosecutor Lindsay Sheehan begins with a reminder: a 3-year-old girl who survived odds overcame 92 days in the NICU, only to succumb to brutal injuries inflicted while at daycare. She lays out the story of repeated bruises, Lindsay's evolving excuses, and the damning medical evidence.
When it was defense attorney Melinda Cook Howard's turn, she told the jury during opening statements that Lindsay Parton did not injure little 32-pound 3-year-old Hannah, who was only with her for 30 seconds to a minute on March 8th of 2018 before she collapsed. That Jason brought his daughter to Lindsay's residence that morning with a blanket over the child's head and a hood pulled up. And 30 seconds later, the child fell to the floor. She explained that 2 days before this, on March 6th, Hannah and the others were playing outside and Hannah took a faceplant into the ground. A day later, Hannah was standing on a toy train and fell hard, and that Lindsay Parton told her father Jason that Hannah took a pretty hard fall and that he may want to take her to urgent care, but he never did. Her defense attorney told the jury that evidence will show that Hannah was not just playing at home normally the night before she was fatally injured, like Jason had claimed to detectives. Something happened, and then the next morning, it came to a head when Hannah was dropped off because there was just not enough time for something catastrophic to occur after Jason left Lindsay's house. And I have to say, both of these opening statements were powerful and compelling. But now it was time for the witnesses. First up was Evan Reedy, Hanover Township firefighter and EMT who treated Hannah at the scene. He was dressed in his uniform, he was calm, but you could see the pain in his eyes as he recalled the chaos. He said, "She was on the couch, struggling to breathe. I took one look at her bruises, her eyes, her chest and face, and thought this was no simple accident. I radioed in, told them we needed urgent care. We had to move fast or she wasn't going to make it." When asked how he felt personally, he swallowed hard and he said, "I'm a father myself. Seeing a little girl in that state, I fought tears the whole drive. Because, when there's that many bruises, that kind of head trauma, you suspect child abuse and you feel sick." Across the courtroom, some jurors averted their eyes when the pictures were shown. The paramedic's testimony set this emotional tone, compassionate, heartbreaking, and fueled by professional certainty that something terrible happened under Lindsay's care.
But during cross-examination by defense attorney Chris Pagan, he pointed out that EMT Reedy wrote in a report days after the incident that Jason was shaking Hannah.
Right. And it was to rouse her, to get her to respond. But of course, a jury may look at it and question it.
Well, actually, he wrote that Jason appeared agitated, repeatedly trying to shake Hannah awake and inadvertently interfering with her care.
Yes, but it was a frantic moment. He could have been shaking her and interfering with their care, but at the same time, this has never happened. This is his daughter.
Yeah, I'd say at that point when your daughter's laying on the floor, like not breathing or maybe shallowly breathing, yeah, maybe you do want to shake, like, wake up.
And he noticed that anytime he would shake her or call out her name, she would breathe. So if you already knew that and you were doing it again and again, that's probably why.
And next, Dr. Nguyen, the ER physician, describes the moment when Hannah arrived. He said that her breathing was shallow and irregular. He went on to explain how the CT scans revealed a massive subdural hemorrhage, shifting Hannah's brain midline. It wasn't just a bump on the head. It was kind of trauma that, in his words, occurs when a child experiences violent shaking or blunt force. He recounted how Jason, Hannah's father, was distraught and how Lindsay kept referring to a fall the previous day, which the medical team found inconsistent with the severity of the injuries. And during all this, the jurors are scribbling notes, glancing over at Lindsay, and she keeps her face stoic. If she's trembling inside, it's carefully masked.
Now, Dr. Marguerite Carey takes the stand. She's a pediatric neuroradiologist from Cincinnati Children's Hospital and a key voice in diagnosing abusive head trauma. Her presence is confident. Dr. Carey clearly and methodically explained the scans indicated an extensive subdural hemorrhage causing the brain to shift. This level of injury typically results from violent shaking or blunt force impact. It would render the child unconscious almost immediately. She emphasized that if Hannah had such a bleed from the day before, she couldn't have been walking, talking, or hugging her dad at drop-off. The jurors leaned in. This directly disputed Lindsay's repeated claim of an older injury. One defense attorney tries to poke holes. Could it be an older bleed? A slow bleed? Dr. Carey shakes her head. Not in my medical opinion, she said. The onset of collapse here was acute. You do not see this level of rapid deterioration from a mild fall 24 hours prior. The hemorrhage we observed is consistent with an event that morning. Her tone left no room for doubt. The air thickened in that courtroom.
And now Dr. Michael Yang testifies. He is an ophthalmologist at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. He talked about the extensive retinal hemorrhages found in Hannah's eyes. Even a fall from a significant height like a 3-story building wouldn't likely produce hemorrhaging as widespread as he observed. Dr. Yang stated, "These hemorrhages involved multiple layers of the retina. In my professional experience, this is a hallmark of abusive head trauma. I've seen it before in shaken baby cases."
The defense attempted to question whether a fall from a ride-on toy could do this, because Lindsay claimed that Hannah fell from a little plastic train that she had in the garage, one made specifically for children, but he remains firm. He said, in my opinion, no. You need a force akin to a high-speed car accident or severe physical violence. And that was when a hush fell over the gallery. The phrase severe physical violence just lingered in the air after this. And then in a riveting testimony, Dr. Dorothy Dean, the forensic pathologist who performed Hannah's autopsy, took the stand. She meticulously described the internal injuries. She said, we found tremendous hemorrhages in her eyes, severe swelling of the brain, and a shearing injury indicative of significant force. A simple fall from the ground level would never produce this extent of damage. She also agreed with prior testimony, stating that Hannah would have become unresponsive within seconds of sustaining that injury. Let's listen to this clip now.
And doctor, when we talk about blunt impacts, could these be simple falls that you're talking about?
Do you mean blunt impacts in general or for Hannah?
Regarding the traumatic brain injury that you found in Hannah.
Oh, no.
Would a simple fall be sufficient to explain that?
Absolutely not.
Would a fall while being held by an adult, would that explain the injuries that you saw?
From ground level, a simple fall cannot explain this injury. This is much too great a force.
And to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, do you have a determination as to the manner of death of Hannah Wesche?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
The manner of death is homicide.
In layman's term, what does that mean?
It means death at the hands of another person.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not Hannah could have been walking or talking or behaving in a normal fashion after receiving the injuries that resulted in her death?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
She could not.
How are you able to say that?
By my medical training and by my own experience, this is a tremendous brain injury. This is really serious. This is a tremendous force to the brain itself. When the brain is injured to this degree to cause a death in this child, the brain can't function properly right away. She would be neurologically abnormal right away, probably unresponsive within moments. This is really serious.
All right, doctor. And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to how quickly Hannah would have become non-responsive receiving that injury?
Within moments. She couldn't be normal after just a few moments, really.
When Hannah's body was brought to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy, the signs of her struggle were evident. A feeding tube was still in her nose, catheters were in her groin, and medical equipment was attached to her head to help manage the brain swelling. Dr. Dean found deep bruising on Hannah's chest in a range of colors from green to brown and purple. Her knee, thigh, and both legs showed additional bruises, and there was a bright red bruise on her right forearm. More concerning was what was found when Dr. Dean examined her head. Hannah's brain was severely swollen, and there was a hemorrhage in her optic nerve.
Now, during her cross-examination, the defense attorney really goes hard on her, and he tries to limit her testimony to the cause of death alone. But Dr. Dean pushes back, insisting the pattern of injuries is vital context because history matters.
The defense attorney's approach during cross-examination appeared puzzling, if not outright counterproductive. Beyond being generally combative, his strategy seemed unclear. Unless it was to alienate the jury, despite his apparent attempts to frustrate witnesses, he failed to rattle them. His repeated aggressive behavior towards the state witnesses likely irritated the jury, as the prosecutors rarely objected, allowing him ample opportunity to make a negative impression.
To me, I think he's downright rude. He's like, I'm asking the questions, you're giving the answers. And I was like, yikes, it's not a good look. I mean, a bad attorney can ruin a case for their client. And during these medical testimonies, some jurors appeared visibly upset, and a few teared up at the thought of a defenseless toddler suffering so severely. Jason was seen in the gallery trying to stay composed. Meanwhile, Lindsay's expression remained neutral, her eyes occasionally flicking back to her attorneys as if looking for reassurance. Dr. Markaroff is called as a child abuse expert, and she states that she's reviewed Hannah's medical records and found that the injuries could not have been caused by a single or even multiple accidental falls. She explained how shaking alone could cause catastrophic injuries consistent with what Hannah experienced. The doctor also stated that based on their professional assessment, the injuries were definitely consistent with child abuse. She leaves little ambiguity, reinforcing the state's assertion that Hannah's injuries were inflicted by Lindsay.
Just when the jury thought they had a grasp on Lindsay's shifting stories, Detective Janae Lambert took the stand. In a measured, professional tone, she recounted an early interview with Lindsay, the one on March 8th, 2018, the very day Hannah collapsed. The room fell silent as Detective Lambert explained a controversial tactic. She admitted that she and her colleagues had lied to Lindsay about Hannah's death to see if that would prompt a confession.
This was the first interview where Lindsay went down to the sheriff's department willingly. And when you first see this video, she's smiling, she's calm, she's kind of going in there like everything's going to be worked out as soon as she tells them her version of the story. We're going to play that clip now.
We want to go over everything that happened.
But why don't you explain the lie that the detectives told her?
Well, Detective Lambert explained to the jury that at that point, they told her that Hannah had died, even though they knew it wasn't true, because they are allowed by law to use deception if it helps obtain the suspect's real story.
Heads turned in the courtroom, some eyebrows raised. It's not every day you hear about police intentionally lying to a suspect, but it is legally recognized as an interrogation method, and we've seen it before. But the jury exchanged looks. They wondered how Lindsay reacted to such a gut punch, saying that this child was dead. She didn't know the difference. She was just sitting there listening. Prosecutors played segments of the recorded interview before the jury. The footage showed Lindsay in a dimly lit interrogation room, arms folded tightly across her chest. Detective Lambert's voice was calm yet probing, and she could be heard telling Lindsay that this was going to be a homicide. Viewers could sense Lindsay's shock on screen. Her eyes darted around. She shouted. And according to Detective Lambert, Lindsay continued denying responsibility, but her story began to show cracks. Lindsay started pointing fingers at Jason, at the child's bad behavior, at the previous day's accidents.
Yeah, nothing happened.
Probably not going to make it.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not.
We're not. So this is going to be a homicide.
We need to find out what's going on.
Oh my God. Oh my God. How she was acting was normal. Yes. I swear to God. I swear on my daughter's life. She walked into the house and nothing was abnormal whatsoever. Not one thing. Not one thing. Holy fuck.
You need to help us out.
I don't know what else to say. I just need you to think. I need you just to, if you need a minute, collect your thoughts. I need you to try to think. Nothing. She ate fine last night. I was getting ready to get her a donut. She asked for a donut. I'm not lying about that. I am dead serious. She turned around and looked at me and said, "Buddy, can I have a donut and couch?"
The tension escalated further when Sergeant Whitlock stepped in, and he now tells her that they pulled the plug on Hannah, and now she's dead, and that was a lie. Then he reinforced that only 2 people had access to Hannah in those critical minutes. If Lindsay claimed TJ, her husband, was at the barn, then logically all signs pointed back to Lindsay. Sergeant Whitlock said to Lindsay, "Doctors are 100% sure this child was beaten, not involved in some simple accident. You're right there in the timeline, so who else could it be?" His voice was firm yet oddly patient and guided Lindsay toward admitting something happened that morning. Meanwhile, the jury was watching in the courtroom, observing how Lindsay reacted, fidgeting, blinking, tossing out alternative theories. 1 second, she suggested that Jason might have hurt Hannah. The next, she acknowledged seeing bruises on Hannah in the past, but she never reported any of these injuries. If there was suspicion, it was ignored. Let's play that portion for you now.
When you had doctors telling you this child was beat, this is abuse, they just pulled the plug on this child. This child is dead.
Oh my God.
So we can't get any more serious than where we're at, Lindsay.
No, we can't.
That's what I'm saying. So they look at a scan that's taken at court. They look at a scan that's taken 35 minutes later when she's rushed into Cincinnati Children's and she's immediately rushed into surgery, okay? and they're able to say with 100% professional opinion that this child, this proximity to when this all occurred, the beating that took place on her head was absolutely in a time frame of the time she was in your house to the time that had to be almost immediate prior to coming to your house. That there's absolutely no positive way that this child was sitting down, playing with blocks, having conversations, that it absolutely could not have happened. So,
she didn't play this morning, but she walked into my house. I will look you in the eye. I've never hurt a kid in my life. Wouldn't even hurt my kids. I don't spank. I don't believe in spanking. Have you ever seen TJ strike any of the kids? No, he's not even around. He's hardly ever home. And when he gets home... Was he there this morning and you're just covering your line? No, he was at the barn. I swear, no, he left at 6:15 because Vivian got up with him. And... Is that the same thing that Jason's going to say when he's here? I would think so, yeah. TJ was already at the barn.
So I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but couldn't the same be said about Hannah's own father? Because if he suspected that something was going on, why didn't he report anything either? I'm not trying to place blame here, but I myself have seen a tiny little red mark on Shyla's face when she came home from daycare. She was about 2 years old at the time. And let me tell you, I almost had a full-on legal investigation into that place. And later, I will admit, I did file a report. And they were cited. And I couldn't keep Shyla there, obviously, but then the facility director actually told me to my face later that I was a problem parent. So that might be the fear that accusing someone brings on even a bigger issue. What if they fight back? What if Jason couldn't afford an attorney? I mean, there's so many reasons why someone might not say anything and just chalk it up to an accident. And his job hinged on him getting along with these people because TJ's father was his boss. And that's the only job he had and he'd had in years.
It's true. It's kind of like biting the hand that feeds. And at this point in the interrogation, Hannah's treating physicians had confirmed that her injuries were so severe that she could not have walked, asked for a donut, or requested to sit on the couch. Things that only Lindsay had ever claimed to witness. The severity of her brain injury, which included a broken orbital bone around her eye socket, would have rendered her immediately unconscious. Despite this, the investigators needed to rule out anyone else who might have had access to Hannah, including Lindsay's boyfriend, TJ Smith. Lindsay denied that TJ was present when Hannah was dropped off, stating that he had been at the barn further away from the property.
Right. So the detectives questioned Lindsay about her relationship with TJ, asking if she was a wife that experienced DV and if TJ had ever hurt her or their children. She denied any mistreatment, insisting that neither of them believed in spanking their own children. Her only complaint about TJ was that he sometimes drank too much. The detectives then pressed her about Jason, and Lindsay admitted that Jason had a temper and mentioned that he had gotten into a fight at work the day before the incident. And that's interesting. She also acknowledged that she occasionally saw bruises on Hannah, but wasn't sure if they were caused by Jason or simply due to neglect. Either way, wouldn't that be important? Again, like nobody's saying anything, but it's interesting. It looks like she's now shifting the blame even more. While she hesitated to accuse him directly, she noted that although Jason loved Hannah, he was often way too busy working to pay her enough attention. And on the weekends, when Jason had his other two daughters visiting, his older daughter Rachel usually played rough with Hannah on the trampoline. His daughters were quite older. They were about 17 and 11 at the time. Still, Lindsay admitted that while she didn't want to believe Jason could hurt Hannah, she couldn't completely rule out the possibility. Now, when you are a licensed daycare provider, you would be what they called a mandatory reporter, but we know that Lindsay was not. Even if you're just a concerned person, she could have reported this, but she didn't. She told detectives that she only wanted to help Jason. She felt bad for him from the beginning. And even though she knew he couldn't always pay, it wasn't about the money for her. She estimated she only earned about $15,000 a year or even less. And she said she could tell that Jason and Hannah were struggling And in the 8 months that she cared for Hannah, she grew to love that little girl. And she was the one who noticed concerns over time. And she was the one that suspected Jason, but didn't want to believe it, especially because she was the peacemaker, as she put it.
During cross-examination, the defense hammered Detective Lambert on the interrogation tactics, painting them as overly coercive. But Lambert's calm demeanor didn't waver. She recounted the moment Lindsay was left alone in the interview room, still being recorded unbeknownst to her. She spontaneously muttered, "I am going to prison for the rest of my life."
Wow. That was a damning moment for sure. And you could tell people in the courtroom were practically holding their breath. For the prosecution, it was the smoking gun statement, an unguarded admission that Lindsay believed that she was guilty enough to face prison. But the defense tried to frame it as panicked hyperbole, something you would say out of fear and frustration in the moment, but the jurors seemed visibly shaken by Lindsay's whispered words. But who doesn't know that they're being recorded? This is 2018. Like, you haven't seen one true crime show?
Really?
That's what I'm always thinking about.
Another key figure, lead detective Dan Turner, stepped in to bolster Detective Lambert's account. Turner clarified that Lindsay had changed her story multiple times in her second interview on March 9th, the day after her first interview. There was the fall the day before, the blanket tangling, the slip on the concrete steps, but none of which aligned with Hannah's immediate incapacitation.
To take off her jacket and just fell forward. And she fell like that, and there was a wheel. I think she hit that. She fell in the door and hit the concrete step. He put her down, and when he walked out the door, I picked her up with the blanket, and it got tangled up. And when I opened up the door, it got tangled, and I slipped. The blanket got underneath my foot, and we both fell. She smacked her face on that concrete step, and I hit the door.
By the second interview, Lindsay had learned that the police had lied to her about Hannah's death, and she believed from her conversations with Jason at the hospital that Hannah was going to recover. So during that second interview, Lindsay maintained that she did not know what happened to Hannah and repeated her claim that Hannah walked into her home that morning and immediately collapsed. Turner then showed Lindsay photos of the bruises on Hannah's body taken at the hospital, and Lindsay attributed some of those bruises to nature walks and suggested others might have occurred while Hannah was with Jason. Initially, she insisted that her only form of discipline was placing Hannah in a timeout chair. From Detective Turner's testimony, it became clear the entire window of opportunity for Hannah's final injury was just minutes right after Jason left and before Lindsay called 911. In the interview, the detectives reassured Lindsay that it was expected for her to feel guilty or even deny involvement, even if the incident was just an accident. That was all normal to feel that way. Now clinging to the accident theory, Lindsay offered yet another version of events. You see why this is suspicious?
And you just told us, and you told us several times, that you were looking at her. It's not like she walked around the corner and you came around and was like, what the hell happened?
No,
you had eye contact with her the whole time.
Yes, sir.
But something caused her to collapse. She didn't just collapse.
Traumatic brain injury.
That's what it says.
Traumatic.
Okay? You called for help.
Yes.
Okay? So,
As soon as she
There's no doubt in our minds that this was an accident.
yeah.
This is a horrible, horrible accident.
All Thursday morning.
This is a horrible accident.
I asked
And you
him
have to tell us, listen to me, listen, and you have to tell us exactly what that accident was. Because she's still being treated, okay? Now, your treatment can go either way, whether she's hit the back of the head with a baseball bat, which I absolutely don't believe she was, or whether she was dropped, or whatever she hit her head on, or got some sort of whiplash somehow.
it was instant.
It was
I
absolutely
believe
instant.
you.
Okay? So, and if you believe that it's instant, you're agreeing that, okay, she fell because she got hit, or something happened. Something caused this, okay, in her head. She fell because of that. All right? What caused that?
What accident caused this?
She fell in the door and hit the concrete step.
When?
Thursday morning.
Walking into the house?
Yes.
Tell us about it. Take us through it.
Details. So when when I opened up the door, she was coming through and she slipped on that concrete step in the metal part. She had the metal part on her eye.
Which door?
The
back
one,
door?
yeah, going into the house, the carpet. And so I got her back up, and she stood up and looked up at me and did say, I want a donut and couch, and then collapsed.
Once detectives got Lindsay to acknowledge the possibility of an accident while under her care, they pressed her further, questioning why she had mentioned the accident from the previous day but failed to disclose anything about the incident that caused Hannah's injury on March 8th. They asked why this particular accident was more challenging for her to admit.
But I did not hurt her.
Well, we're not saying you hurt her. We're saying you were there for the accident.
Yeah, that was the
Okay?
accident.
Because that's exactly what happened, and that was not the accident. That's not what it is. We know that without a doubt. Okay? They didn't have, she has no broken bones in her face. Okay?
I mean, this is a common thing being broken when somebody's head or falls, okay? That's not broken.
Breaks easily to protect your brain.
Yeah,
Okay?
I thought it.
And there's no broken bones in her face. So that's not what happened. Okay? You know, we've come a long way. We got past that. Okay?
Yeah.
You're right there. You're right there. Thank you.
When I opened the door, I dropped her. And I slipped and fell.
What's what happened?
So I slipped on her blanket when I opened the door, and we both went down, and she hit that concrete step really hard.
Where at? On her head?
On her face, yeah. I was holding her on the left side. So when I slipped, it hit her side. I actually hit my head on the door coming down, but she smacked her face, her head really hard on the concrete step.
Okay, and then what happened?
We got up. I tried to get her to come to. She did ask me for a donut and couch out in the garage, not inside, but she did. When we first walked in, and Jason walked out, and she
So
said,
now you're saying she asked that before.
yeah.
And at this point in the interrogation, Lindsay still believed that Hannah would make a full recovery. Because remember, she's saying that supposedly Jason told her this at the hospital. This was the whole aneurysm discussion that I told you about. In Lindsay's third version of events, she claimed that after Hannah had asked for a donut and to sit on the couch, Lindsay tripped on Hannah's blanket, causing her to fall on top of the child. So according to this account, Hannah hit her face hard on the concrete step. Lindsay explained that this injury caused the mark under Hannah's eye and made her eye appear sunken into her head. And when I heard that and pictured that, it scared me. But I cannot really make any of this add up. That would have been such a hard fall.
Right, and at that point, you would call and be like, oh my God, I just fell on your daughter.
Right, or you would just call 911 right then and be like,
because that's an accident.
Right, and like, why didn't she call 911? Why did she call Jason? But then again, okay, he was a minute away. I guess you would.
But now detectives were not satisfied with this latest version either. And since they got Lindsay to admit to an accident, they pressed her to move closer to what they believed was the truth. They wanted her to admit the intentional and direct harm.
This is a tactic in interviews like this. It's like inch by inch. They get a suspect to admit something little and then bigger and then the bombshell.
And they felt like they were on their way to a full confession. They pointed out that her explanation didn't account for the bruising on the back of Hannah's neck, an area where she also had a brainstem bleed. They asked Lindsay if she was familiar with touch DNA and explained that it could be found days later under Hannah's chin and at the back of her neck.
This was obviously to scare her into saying something like, do you know anything about touch DNA? Because it can be found days later. They were like really pressing this. And this line of questioning prompted Lindsay to admit to physically harming Hannah. Yep. So they got the confession that they wanted, though she claimed she only did so because she had permission from Hannah's father. Yeah. In Lindsay's own words, she believed Jason gave her permission to discipline Hannah, which is what she said she did. But then she claimed she didn't realize how forceful she had been. So let's listen.
Tell us what the hell was chin.
I really did not hit her on the chin. I don't
I'm not saying anything.
Right, yeah, I
Does
don't.
she talk back to you?
No,
She doesn't?
not one bit.
Does she not listen to you? Like, if
She actually does look.
if she's watching a show and you tell her to do something, does she not listen?
No, she doesn't.
How do you get her attention when she doesn't listen?
Hannah, you gotta listen to Buddy.
Does she not eat well?
No, she eats great. She eats all day long.
Okay, then tell us what happened here.
Tell us about that.
This was not a fall in the driveway. We know what this is consistent with.
Yeah.
Look at me. We do this for a living.
No, I know.
Okay?
I
This
know.
is not the first 3-year-old that we're staring at pictures about, okay? We know exactly what caused this, okay? Exactly. It's not a fall. And you know what caused this. Just like you knew what caused this, okay? So what caused this?
I smacked her on the chin for doing it. That was the same thing.
Right. So this is the same incident.
Yeah.
Tell us about this. Because this is not a smack. I just want to tell you right now, this is not a deep bone contusion from an open-handed smack. Okay? Knowing that.
I didn't.
No,
I wasn't like that.
listen. Knowing that we know that, what happened here?
The same thing. It was the same incident.
Tell us, though, what happened,
Wait.
these specific bruises.
When I caught her doing the ketchup, I took it away and I put her on the potty because I think she had to go pee anyway. I said, Henny, you can't get the ketchup. And I just slapped her on the side of the head and went like that.
Close.
Yeah, like that.
How many times? Don't say once. Because the bruise.
Yeah.
Lindsay admitted to ear slaps that caused bruises on both of Hannah's ears, while the bruising under her chin resulted from what she described as uppercuts. Using a martial arts style clawed fist, she demonstrated this double strike with an uppercut-like motion. And I was sitting there going, I was watching this going, why would you ever do that to a child?
How would you uppercut a kid?
I don't know. This is at the point where I was like, okay, you have gone off the deep end. I can't even listen to her anymore. During this part of the interrogation, Lindsay asked whether she should talk to a lawyer because I think she's freaking out at this point. And detectives responded that it was her decision, but they continued questioning her. And this is when Lindsay admitted that the bruises on Hannah's chest were caused by aggressively poking her while yelling, Hannah, you know better. And this is whenever she did something wrong, she would poke her in the chest like that with her finger. She also confessed to regularly squeezing Hannah around the middle of her torso, a form of discipline, she said, explaining that Hannah was often mischievous. This was building a chilling narrative. Maybe Lindsay's frustration had boiled over that morning, culminating in a violent shake or strike that caused this catastrophic head injury. According to the report that I read and everything that we've told you, this would have been essentially her taking this little girl's head and probably slamming it into the concrete on the floor or shaking her so violently that her brain actually moved in her head.
But again, the defense countered by pointing out how the detectives lied to Lindsay about Hannah's death and used the Reed technique. This is an interrogation method that can, in some cases, lead to false confessions. Detective Turner acknowledged that they did lie, but insisted it was standard procedure to extract truth from a suspect who kept shifting details. He reminded the court that beyond Lindsay's confessions, the medical evidence was overwhelming.
The defense attorney challenged Detective Turner, saying, so you knew for certain her older bruises weren't from an accident, and you told Lindsay that as a fact when you didn't know for sure. And Detective Turner was firm. He said, I was confident that the doctor's findings indicated repeated trauma, not a single accidental fall. This is how we get a suspect to talk, he said, by confronting them with strong, factual evidence.
Then, defense cast doubt by highlighting Jason's own inconsistencies. He had claimed a Walmart trip to buy milk the night before, which was proven false by missing security footage. They mentioned a guy named Chris, Jason's friend, who was around the night before. But Detective Turner remained steadfast. None of that changed the medical fact that Hannah would have been unconscious immediately after such a severe brain injury. If it had happened earlier, she wouldn't have been able to hug her dad or ask for a donut.
Then it was Jason Wesche's turn to take the stand. He described the difficulties surrounding Hannah's birth. Despite working full-time, he visited her in the hospital 3 or 4 times a week after work. And once Hannah's mother was able to see her again, she only visited intermittently before cutting off all contact completely in May of 2017, before Jason moved into the home next to Lindsay. He explained that he worked as a pipe fitter and mechanic at Smith Corporation and rented his home from his boss, who was also Lindsay's father-in-law, TJ's father. He also acknowledged the fact that he always thought that Lindsay and TJ were married, so he thought it was her husband, but it was just her long-term partner. But either way, on a typical day, Jason said he dropped Hannah off with Lindsay in the morning and then picked her up between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Jason then recounted the timeline leading up to Hannah's fatal injury, corroborating his account with phone records. He testified that he habitually texted Lindsay just before arriving every day, as he lived right next door. But during that week of March 5th, before the incident, he noticed several suspicious injuries on Hannah, which Lindsay attributed to at least 3 incidents, which included bruises on Hannah's chest, significant bruising on her chin, and a black eye. So let's listen to that now.
Between Monday, March 5th and Thursday, March 8th, were you aware of Hannah receiving any injuries?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that?
Lindsay told me after I picked Hannah up.
Did that happen one day, multiple days? How many times were there conversations about injuries that Hannah had that week?
She fell in the driveway. I'm going to say 3.
Well, tell me, to your recollection, what injuries do you recall Hannah having in those days leading up to March 8th, and what Lindsay told you about those?
She had little bruises all over her chest and a pretty bad scrape on the chin. When I picked her up, Lindsay said that her and her daughter Vivian were playing in the driveway and Hannah had tripped over the heel of a boot and fell on the rocks. She had a bruise on her chin and a black eye. One day, Lindsay said that she had stepped up on top of a toy on wheels and the toy kicked out from underneath of her and she fell on the handlebar. She fell on a step too, but I can't recollect if she told me that week or not about that.
Of course, we already know that on the morning of March 8th, Lindsay informed him that Hannah had collapsed. That was the first time he said he saw Hannah's sunken eye and a cut beneath it. Injuries that were not visible when he dropped her off earlier.
Right. And think about this. If she had been already injured when she was dropped off, wouldn't Lindsay have noticed?
Exactly. And she would have said something. If the baby was dropped off with those injuries, she would have immediately been like, wait a minute. The girl's got a black eye, a cut on her chin, like what's going on? But that didn't happen. And Jason said he also observed a bruise on her forehead that he hadn't seen before. But Jason did not recall any bruises on Hannah's arms, her buttocks, or back. He admitted that for the 3 weeks prior to her death, Hannah had been complaining of headaches. At the time, he said he did not connect those complaints to the bruises later found beneath her hair by the pathologist, things that he could not see. And I just want to say that as a mom who now has a 13-year-old, and I already said this, when she was in daycare and only 2, I saw something and kind of freaked out. But I've never actually heard my child until she was about 11 ever complain of a headache, because I don't think that headaches are that common for young people. So that would be a red flag and very significant to me. Under cross-examination, when asked by the defense, Jason acknowledged that he was not aware Hannah had tested positive for hepatitis C or that it could cause excessive bruising. Now, this was related to things that happened in utero. She was actually born with this. And even if it did cause her to bruise easily, it didn't make up for how many bruises she had. And he also admitted that Hannah had never told him that Lindsay was hitting her or hurting her. However, her maternal grandpa later said that little Hannah would spend every Sunday with him. And on one occasion, Hannah told him the babysitter hurt her.
Wow.
Yeah, but these were people in her family. They were family members. So would they lie?
I don't know.
Right. I mean, you don't know.
One of the theories the defense presented was that Hannah had hit her head when Jason sped out of the driveway that morning, since she wasn't strapped into a car seat and was, on his account, lying in the back seat.
Which was unusual, so it could have been some kind of excuse to why she was back there.
Car is nose in.
Yes, ma'am.
Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You don't park in that little garage, correct?
No, ma'am.
Your car's outside, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You would agree with me that the closest door from your front door to the car is the passenger side,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
That was my question.
Yes, ma'am.
So now you're telling the jury that you didn't put her in the passenger seat door, you walked around to the driver's side. Is that what you're saying?
I didn't have to walk around. I walked right in front of my car and we got in the driver's side. Yes, ma'am. I did not come out and go to the passenger side. I walked out, walked in front of my car, opened my driver's door, and we got in the car.
30 seconds, correct?
Yes.
And you've already agreed with me that it was cold that day. You probably had snow on your car, correct?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me that your car doesn't immediately warm up, correct?
No, ma'am.
It does?
I said, no, ma'am, it does not immediately warm up.
Okay. And so you'd agree with me that you had to wait a little bit for the car to warm up before you put it in reverse, correct?
No, ma'am.
You didn't?
No, ma'am.
You immediately shoved that thing into reverse and got the heck out of the driveway?
Yeah, when I'm leaving for work, yes, ma'am. I started
Is
my
that when
car.
Hannah fell in the back seat and hit her head?
Hannah never fell in the back seat.
Are you certain?
I'm 100% certain.
Because if she fell in the back seat, climbing over the front seat, and hit her head, and it killed her, then you'd be responsible. Isn't that true?
I assume I would, yes, ma'am, but Hannah did not
So
fall
that's
in the
why you're
back
pretty
seat.
certain that that's not what happened.
No, ma'am.
So we're at 6:55, 6:56 and 30 seconds? You got to pull out of your driveway, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That drive's pretty long, isn't it?
No, ma'am.
How far is it?
About from here to the doors, maybe?
Okay. So you're at a dead stop in your car that sat presumably all night long in the cold, and you shoved that thing in reverse. How long does it take you to get out into the main road of Shank?
Maybe 5 seconds?
Because you're driving fast?
No, I'm not driving fast, but it doesn't take me very long to back out of my driveway. My driveway wasn't very long.
You'd agree with me that your driveway has a slight curve to it, correct?
A little bit.
It's not a straight shot, correct?
Right at the top, it curves.
The defense counsel attempted to provoke Jason on the stand, hoping that he would lose his composure in front of the jury. Jason's calmness under the scrutiny did impress some jurors. At one point, Jason was asked if he was just guessing about the time frames, and he admitted that he was. Let's listen.
You spent a lot of time, I believe, on cross-examination trying to guess time frames
Yes,
and
ma'am.
about how long it takes you to get somewhere.
Yes, ma'am.
You ever taken a stopwatch and timed yourself to do that?
No, ma'am.
Well, how do you determine that time?
I was guessing. I can't say for sure on specific seconds.
Do you have any reason to disagree with what the phone records say regarding timing of texts and timing of calls?
No, ma'am.
So essentially, all they really have to rely on are the times that text messages and calls come in and out.
And despite the defense's attempts to provoke him, he stuck to what he said he knew. Hannah had bruises he couldn't explain, but he trusted Lindsay's explanations until it was too late.
And after the prosecution rested, it was the defense's turn to finally present their case. Lindsay's story, Lindsay's side, suggesting maybe Hannah was injured before arriving at her house. They mentioned Jason's story about taking Hannah to Walmart the night before, which turned out to be false. No footage, no milk. The defense tried to plant seeds of doubt. Could Jason have harmed Hannah earlier? But the medical experts had already made it clear. Hannah's injuries were immediately incapacitating. She wouldn't have been able to hug her father, ask about donuts, or ask for one more kiss if the injury had occurred hours before. So I feel that sealed the deal. But the moment arrives. Lindsay Parton chooses to testify in her own defense. Of course she did. It's a pivotal move. She walks to the stand, posture tense, her appearance, well, plain. Her blonde hair parted to the side, wearing a casual scoop neck shirt, a cross necklace around her neck, prominently featured. She truly looked like the girl next door, because she was. Her attorney started by saying, "Good morning," and Lindsay replied back, "Good morning," in such a quiet voice. and she smiles when her attorney tells her, "You're going to have to speak up." From the looks of it, Lindsay truly appeared innocent, just a sweet, loving mother of 2 young girls, 4-year-old Vivian and 3-year-old Savannah. It makes you question whether she could do something like this. She starts her relevant testimony by responding to her attorney's question, "Did you cause harm to Hannah Wesche on March 8th? And Lindsay said she did not. Her attorney asked, "Did you cause harm to her on March 6th? And Lindsay again says she did not. "What about March 7th? "I did not," she repeats. Her attorney pressed her. "Then why did you tell police that you did?" She sounds like she's almost in tears. And Lindsay said it's because she wanted to protect everybody. And then she retracted her earlier confessions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You talk softly.
I do, sorry.
You're going to have to talk loudly.
I will try my best.
Okay. I talk loudly, so try to match my voice.
Okay.
Lindsay, did you cause harm to Hannah Wesche on March 8th?
I did not.
Did you cause harm to her on March 6th?
I did not.
Did you cause harm to her on March 7th?
I did not.
Why did you tell the police that you did?
Because I wanted to protect everybody.
And what do you mean by I wanted to protect everybody?
In the first interview, I felt like it was all about TJ. I mean, they even asked me if I was an abused wife, if he was abusing me. And I cared about Jason. I didn't want anybody to be in trouble.
Lindsay goes on to explain that she'd never been in a police interview like this before. Her brother was a cop. She was very close with him, and she trusted cops. So this was to say that she spoke to them completely thinking that they were on her side, not suspecting that they thought she was guilty of anything. And all she wanted to do was help, she said. Lindsay softly told the jury, "I never hurt Hannah. I just said what I thought the detectives wanted to hear. I was scared, confused, and they lied to me, saying Hannah had died."
She explained that she was trying to protect Jason and her husband TJ. She reasserts that Hannah had been complaining of headaches, had bruises before she arrived. She claims her police statements admitting to poking and hitting Hannah were coerced, saying that she was bullied in the second interview. Lindsay testified that it took Jason at least 7 minutes to get to her house after his text to her that morning, which put him there at about 7 a.m., which would mean when Jason said he got there 2 minutes after that text, he was not estimating correctly. Her 911 call was at 7:02 and 51 seconds. She claimed that within just 10 seconds of entering her garage with Hannah, after Jason left that morning, she had suddenly collapsed and fell forward.
She explained that Jason was carrying Hannah, which was not usual, especially with a blanket over her head and her hood up. And then they talked for a little bit when he got there about things like it being cold that morning and how the vapor rub worked on her bruises. He said they looked better, but it was dim in that room. And she said she never moved Hannah's hair or analyzed her. She was still in Jason's arms. She asserted that after Jason put her down, she grabbed Lindsay's hand and they walked inside and Jason left. Lindsay asked her if she wanted to go back to sleep or onto the couch. And she said that Hannah responded donut and couch. And as they were stepping inside, Lindsay went to take off her robe and put down her phone, and Hannah collapsed forward. Lindsay said she had her for 10 seconds. That's it. Just 10 seconds after Jason left, and she immediately tried to call him at 7 o'clock and 47 seconds. It rang twice and went right to voicemail. He returned her call at 7:01 and 24 seconds. She told him Hannah collapsed. "I don't know what's going on, but I need you to come up here right away." So I know everyone's thinking, what really happened? I mean, that's what's going through my head this entire time. My head is spinning. When I was watching her testimony, it almost made me cry. She didn't come off as a liar or as someone evil or mean. She came off as a genuinely caring person who was just now caught up in this mystery. And I'll be real with you, it did sway me. But I want to keep going so that everyone can hear everything and then talk about it in the comments. Lindsay explained that she also confronted Jason about the bruises that she saw in the week leading up to the incident. Specifically on March 6th, she said she didn't notice bruising on Hannah's face when she left, but she did see it the next day on the 7th. That would be a day before the incident. And she also talked about what she saw on the day of the incident as far as the bruises were concerned. So let's listen.
When she left that day, did you notice any bruising?
No.
When Hannah arrived the next day, did you see any bruising?
That morning, yes.
Okay. And what did you see?
I still saw the abrasion scratch. And then she had bruises on her chin, and then I could just see some above her shirt line.
Okay. And you're pointing to your chest. What do you mean by shirt line?
She had like one of those kid shirts, like
a what?
Like a kid shirt from Walmart, like crew neck, I think is what the style is called.
Okay.
But up here.
And when did you notice that?
Going potty. I try to get them to go potty before we have breakfast.
Okay.
So like first potty of the day.
And how would you describe what you saw on her chin area?
Bruises right here.
And you're pointing to both sides of your face?
Mm-hmm.
And any other markings?
Just the top right here.
At the top of her crew neck shirt?
Mm-hmm.
Could you see anything on her neck?
I didn't notice anything on her neck.
Okay. And did you lift her shirt up?
No.
When she went potty on that day, did you check her butt cheeks?
I did not.
Did you ask anybody about those bruises?
Jason later on when he picked her up.
That day?
Mm-hmm.
So this day is what day?
Wednesday, March 7th.
March 7th. And you ask him about it when he picks up at the end of the day?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you ask, other than Jason, did you ask anybody else about those bruises?
No.
Okay. Based upon your conversation, did you form a belief as to those bruises?
That they were from falling in the driveway?
Did you look at any other part of her body?
No.
What did she come dressed in that day?
Jeans, a shirt.
Did she have a coat?
I don't quite remember. Oh, Wednesday morning?
Yeah.
Yeah, she had her coat on. It was cold. Again.
You were shown the photograph of the bruising on the chest of, I'll call it the torso of Hannah, correct?
Yes.
And do you remember that photograph?
Yes.
Did you cause those bruises on her chest?
No, I didn't.
Did you see those bruises on her chest?
Just the top part of that.
Okay. And when you say the top part of that, what do you mean?
The group of them, just the top part of it, not all of it.
And you're kind of pointing to where I'd call your collarbone area?
She called 911 at 7:02 a.m. in 51 seconds. I mean, to me, this had to have happened so fast. But in Jason's version, there were at least 9 minutes that went by. And this is why you need cameras in places like this where children are, where things can happen, because we wouldn't even have any questions. We would know exactly what happened. But to me, there were so many questions. Here is Lindsay explaining that second interview where she says she felt bullied.
And is there any difference in how you felt in the second interview?
Very much.
What was that difference?
They didn't care what I had to say of my truth. They only wanted their own answers. I felt pressured. I felt forced. I wanted to protect everybody. I felt bullied.
During the second interview, Lindsay stated that she felt compelled to protect both Jason and TJ. At that time, she still believed that Hannah's injuries were a result of an accident. However, she now believes that Jason is responsible for Hannah's death. Lindsay speculated that something must have happened during the car ride to her house that caused Hannah's injuries. Either Jason struck her or Hannah fell in the back of the car, and Jason did not use a car seat during their morning drives. So Lindsay really thinks that this is how she got injured. She said in that interview, she even tried to allude to the fact that she thought Jason might be involved, but the investigators apparently never wanted to hear that.
Why didn't you throw Jason to the wolves, to the detectives on March 8th?
Because I care about him. He was my friend. I cared about his daughters, all three of them. We'd become friends over the year that I had Hannah.
Why didn't you throw him to the detectives as the person who did it on March 9th?
Just wanted to protect everybody. I didn't want anybody to be in trouble.
Why would you want to protect someone who did this to a child?
I always think the best of people. I just didn't.
They showed you the photographs of Hannah in the hospital, right?
Yeah, on my second interview, yes.
Yeah. On March 9th, they showed you these photos. And you wanted to protect the person who did this?
I didn't want anybody to be in trouble. I wanted to protect everybody.
Did you lie to the police?
I told them what they wanted to hear.
What do you mean you told them that what they wanted to hear?
All of their questions, like leading into it's an accident, did she fall, all of those things. I just agreed with them because the day before, for hours, I told them what happened. And even an hour into that second interview, I told them what happened. They didn't want to hear it. They actually told me they didn't want to hear it.
Lindsay mentioned that the truth about what happened to Hannah was reflected in her statements during her first interrogation and the first hour of her second interrogation. She insisted that those initial accounts were accurate.
During cross-examination, the prosecutor pulls out text messages where Lindsay is complaining about babysitting Hannah, referencing the missing payments and her frustrations with Hannah's mischievous behavior. Lindsay squirmed on the stand. The prosecutor asked, "Did you text your friend about how you were fed up with Hannah acting out? Didn't you also mention giving her a slap?" Lindsay looked down and explained, "I was just venting. I never really harmed her. I never thought she'd end up like this." The tension is building, some spectators shaking their heads and others sit on the edge of their seats. Lindsay reiterated that the only reason she altered her story during interrogation was because the detectives pressured her and bullied her. She stated that they refused to accept her original account and insisted that something else had happened to Hannah until she felt forced to change the truth to please them.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that we've heard of this happening. People can be pressured to tell something that is not truthful because they're scared, or maybe they just want to go home. You know, there's sometimes when detectives will be like, "Listen, just tell us that you did something because you know what? We can just let you go home to your family." And I know that sounds weird. Like, why would you lie? But everyone deals with pressure differently. One of the trial's most gripping moments, though, was the cross-examination when the prosecutor questioned Lindsay sharply on her contradictory statements. The prosecutor firmly asked her, "You told paramedics the injury happened yesterday. Then you told detectives that you were carrying Hannah and slipped. And then you said you tripped on her blanket. So which version is it, Miss Parton?" Lindsay's eyes then turned to her attorney, and she said, "I was confused. I was trying to recall exactly what happened and everything was happening so fast. I'm not lying." And then she just trails off. You could see her eyes kind of welling up with tears. You could tell she was frustrated and scared. And the prosecutor just kept pressing her, pointing out how each memory she supplied undercuts the previous one. Lindsay's credibility unraveled further in the eyes of the jury at this point.
So it's your testimony today that you admitted to hurting Hannah and you didn't think you would be in trouble?
No, I didn't. I was under the assumption that he would back me up.
So it was your thought process on 3/9 of 2018 that you could admit to poking Hannah in the chest and you wouldn't be in trouble?
Yes.
And that you could admit to squeezing her and her middle and you wouldn't be in trouble? That's your testimony?
Yes.
And that you could admit to hitting her with a closed fist multiple times under the chin and you wouldn't be in trouble?
Yes.
And that you could admit to shaking her until she lost consciousness and you wouldn't be in trouble? Objection. That's a mischaracterization of that statement.
Some people can be telling the truth, but they don't do well under pressure at all. That's what happens. I mean, some people just clam up, they get nervous, and they say the wrong things.
Although Lindsay repeatedly told police that she did not believe in spanking under cross-examination, Lindsay admitted that she thought she had Jason's permission to use physical punishment as a means of disciplining Hannah.
Ma'am, it's your testimony that on 3/9 of 2018 that you didn't know that admitting to shaking Hannah would get you in trouble.
No, I didn't think it would.
It's your testimony that on 3/9 of 2018 that you didn't know that shaking Hannah and that you didn't even know if she lost consciousness wouldn't get you in trouble.
No, I didn't think so.
You showed a bruise on your hand to Detective Hensley, did you not?
I did.
You claimed that when you fell with Hannah, you had a bruise.
Yes.
But it's your testimony today that that never happened. Why would you show them your hand?
It seemed logical. at the time.
Ma'am, was it your belief that you could squeeze her middle?
Yes.
Was it your belief that you could hit her on the face with an open hand?
Yes.
And was it your belief that you could hit her on the chin with a closed fist?
Yes.
And was it your belief that you could shake her?
Yes.
Okay, wait a minute. She thought she could put her hands on this child? Because that to me seemed unhinged. Why would anyone think that? And I figured maybe it was to excuse any harm, saying, oh, well, Jason said I was allowed to punish her this way. So putting it on him?
No one would give you permission to uppercut a kid.
I know, it's terrible. That cannot be true.
With Lindsay's admission about physically punishing Hannah, the cross-examination concluded.
And now it was the defense's turn to bring in their star witness, Dr. Werner Spitz. And yes, it's that Dr. Spitz, the legendary forensic pathologist who testified in the Casey Anthony trial. According to him, Hannah's fatal injury came from a blow to the back of the head, one that likely happened within at least 24 hours of her collapse, not immediately before. Dr. Spitz floated a theory that Hannah might have had periods of clarity before her condition spiraled downward. He also insisted that the other bruises on the head actually formed after the injury because of the severe brain swelling. In other words, Dr. Spitz believed it was entirely possible that Hannah's death stemmed from an accidental fall the day before, or an injury that happened while she was still with her father. He did not examine Hannah, though, only photos at autopsy. And I also want to note, this was the first time that we saw some of the autopsy photos, and I can tell you that I cannot get them out of my head. But there was one thing about seeing them. I now understand that there were 3 different areas of injury on the back of her head, but it was all from one impact. The doctor showed that there were some areas that were darker because she bled longer after the injury. And this is when she would have been on the respirator at the hospital. So it would make the injury seem much larger at the time of autopsy, and it made sense to me. But I think it's hard to understand Dr. Spitz, number one, because of his accent and also his age. So I don't think his testimony came off as powerful as the other experts on the state side. I'm just going to play a short clip to show the audience how he sounds so you can get an understanding of this.
The coup injury is manifested. That means you see evidence of the site of impact based on the presence of coup injury. Like if an injury occurs to the back of the head, there will be a focus, an area in the back of the head that will have sustained the coup injury. And then the brain bounces back and hits the bone on the opposite side, namely in the front, the forehead area, and in that area will be the contra coup.
I think he's saying coup and counter coup, or at least that's what it sounds like. But what it means is, like, if you get hit here, your brain also moves and hits here. So you get 2 injuries, a counter injury.
Right.
You can kind of tell how hard he is to listen to. Lindsay turned her head away when the autopsy photos were shown. And even her attorney looked like she was sad and shocked and even shedding a tear.
But the prosecution wanted everyone to picture a different scene. They pointed out that Lindsay had recently suffered a miscarriage just weeks before Hannah's death, and she was under serious emotional strain. Their argument, though, was that Lindsay snapped, and they claimed she was infuriated when Hannah clung to her dad and wouldn't let him leave. In the prosecution's point of view, Lindsay saw Hannah's reluctance as a cry for help, like the little girl was trying to alert Jason that something was off at Lindsay's house. So according to the prosecution, once Jason walked out that door, Lindsay's anger boiled over. She allegedly hit Hannah so hard, leaving that telltale mark beneath her eye. Then, in a fit of rage, she violently shook Hannah, causing a shearing injury in her brain. And all of this, they claimed, went down within just a minute or so of Jason leaving.
Then defense attorney Melinda Howard stood up next to weave a completely different narrative. She said this was all about Jason making Lindsay into a scapegoat. At the hospital, Jason Lee allegedly told Lindsay that Hannah had simply had an aneurysm and she would be okay. Not only that, he supposedly assured Lindsay that if she admitted to disciplining Hannah, she wouldn't face trouble because, in his words, Hannah's injuries weren't linked to mistreatment. Then, according to the defense, Jason promised to back Lindsay up if she confessed to causing those bruises. But that wasn't their only bombshell. Howard revealed that within 12 to 18 hours of Hannah's fatal injury, Jason had his friend, we heard about him, Chris, over at his house. And apparently Jason kept this detail under wraps for a year. Could Chris have been the one responsible? As a matter of fact, Jason did not mention Chris until one day before the trial began.
I want to direct your attention to Wednesday, March 7th of 2018, which would be the night before or the day before.
Yes, ma'am.
Had Lindsay watched Hannah that day?
Yes.
And do you recall what time you picked Hannah up that day?
It was about 7 o'clock. Excuse me. It was a late night that night. It was about 7 o'clock p.m.
And when you picked Hannah up, were you given any information about any injury that she received that day?
Yes, that's when she told me she fell on the train.
And that would be the black eye that you circled?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do after that?
After that, I had a friend of mine stay at my house, and I dropped him back off at his apartment that night.
And where would that have been?
In Fairfield, Ohio, at Cobblestone Grove.
Where'd you go after that?
I came back home.
You remember telling detectives you went to go get milk?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
Did you do that?
No, ma'am.
Why'd you tell them that?
I thought I did. I was just confused. I mean, at the time I was being questioned, I was focused on my daughter. I meant to get milk. I thought I did. I didn't. I ended up going back home after I dropped him off.
When did you realize you'd taken a friend home?
Sunday.
Sunday when?
This past Sunday. I was talking to him on the phone, and we were talking about my daughter, and that was the last time he saw her.
So Chris saw her the last night she was alive, and he was there. But Jason never mentioned that fact. He said he went out to go get milk, but he really drove with Hannah for over an hour to drop off his friend.
The defense went on to argue that Dr. Spitz's testimony left plenty of room for a scenario where Hannah had a brief window of normalcy that morning before succumbing to injuries caused earlier. Maybe from a fall, maybe from Jason or his friend Chris. Maybe they had something to do with it. In short, they claimed that Lindsay was unfairly pinned with the blame for Hannah's tragic death.
Right. She's trying to paint Lindsay as the victim of circumstance and police pressure. She highlighted Jason's timeline inconsistencies and the presence of Chris at Jason's home. She argued that Hannah's older bruises prove that Jason might have been physical or neglectful, but each time she raised these points, the prosecution countered with medical testimony. Hannah was fully functional at drop-off that morning, so the injury had to occur afterward. But I kept thinking, was she fully functioning? I mean, she was being carried by her father. She looked like she was half asleep by both of their accounts. But then the prosecution also emphasized Lindsay's own phone searches about bruises. On one hand, I was trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the fact that you would erase a search about bruises is weird to me. But on the other hand, I was thinking, okay, maybe she didn't want her daycare to look bad because maybe they were accidents that caused the bruises. She was like, oh my gosh, how can I eliminate these bruises? I don't want anyone to think I'm doing anything wrong, but still, erasing them? That's not okay.
Right. Erasing it is weird because if your kid gets a bruise, you might be searching how to get rid of it.
Right. Now I understand what you mean. It's like all of us might search it. Why erase it? Because then it looks like you searched it for a weird reason. I get it. And that's true.
And I think it's clear that the jury sees a pattern that doesn't align with a simple caretaker who was clueless about injuries.
Right. She has 2 children of her own. She's definitely gotten bruises herself throughout her lifetime. There would be no need to research how to eliminate them unless you were trying to hide them for some weird reason.
In your first interview, you told detectives that you Googled how to make a bruise look better. Is that right?
Yes.
And in your second interview, you told detectives that you Googled how to make a bruise feel better. Is that right?
Yes.
But isn't it true that in actuality, and according to Defendant's Exhibit D, do you permission to publish? You didn't Google how to make a bruise look better, how to make a bruise feel better. You Googled how to get rid of a bruise. Is that right?
Yes.
And you would have Googled that the day that Hannah fell off the train, March 7th.
The morning of.
Okay. When Dad came to pick her up, do you remember telling Dad that she fell off the train at 4 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember telling Detective Mayer when he responded to the house on 3 that she had fallen off the train at 4 p.m. the day before?
Yes.
Ms. Parton, can you please look at how to get rid of a bruise on 3/7? Can you tell me the timestamp?
8 a.m., 48 minutes and 17 seconds.
All right. And is 8 a.m. before or after 4 p.m., ma'am?
It's before.
So when you said that you Googled it after she fell off the train, that wouldn't have been correct.
I'm not sure.
And ma'am, you indicated during your first interview, you knew that the police were going to look at your phone at that point, didn't you?
Yes.
And I think you made a comment when you were sitting by yourself, like, they're going to look at my phone. Is that right?
I don't remember that. I'm not sure.
We've gone through some other information that you deleted throughout this time. You didn't delete Celebrex, right?
No.
You didn't delete Is Vapor Rub good for bruises?
No, ma'am.
You didn't delete What Essential Oils is good for bruises?
No, ma'am.
The only one that's showing here that you deleted is How to Get Rid of a Bruise. Is that fair?
Yes.
Wow. To me, that's very telling. She Googled it that morning, not after she fell off the train or she said she fell off the train. And then the part where she was like, I'm not sure when they asked her about the times. Like, how are you not sure that 8 o'clock comes before 4 o'clock? And she also mumbled, they're going to look at my phone while she was in the interview room, and how she kept saying, oh, I don't recall. Those are all bad signs.
Yeah, that looks guilty to me.
I mean, I did have some thoughts that Jason could have possibly done something because I'm listening like everybody else. And the defense did show these pictures of Jason's living environment, right? And they were trying to make it out like it was filthy and gross and disgusting. And then there were places where Jason said Hannah didn't even sleep, but they were trying to make it out like, look, she's sleeping with no sheets. He's like, no, she sleeps in my bed. She doesn't sleep there. She just plays there with her sisters. It wasn't the cleanest and most perfect room. There weren't any sheets on the bed. It was true. There were boxes still in the room from when they moved, hardly any clothes in the closet. But we know how hard Jason was working to afford things. It doesn't mean he hurt his child. And now in his room, there were tons of children's clothing, even if it was all over the floor. But you know, a messy house doesn't mean foul play. But the defense really tried to paint Jason's house as almost unlivable. And they highlighted a suitcase of men's clothing inside, presumably Chris's clothing, to show that he was still around when Hannah was harmed. Now that could raise reasonable doubt.
After hours of testimony and cross-examination, both sides delivered their closing arguments. The prosecution leaned heavily on the medical experts, the paramedics' emotional account, and Lindsay's conflicting statements. They present Hannah's photo, eyes bright in a family snapshot, and remind the jury of how that same child ended up brain dead. The defense attempts to salvage doubt, hammering away at the possibility of an old injury, calling Lindsay a scapegoat for Jason's failures. They insist Lindsay only confessed to disciplining Hannah because she believed it would get her in trouble if the child's injuries were from an aneurysm or an older injury.
The emotional buildup left the jury visibly shaken. Some members stare at Lindsay with disbelief. Others were glancing at Jason, who had tears in his eyes. Throughout these trial testimonies, the cold facts mingled with raw human emotion. Paramedics broke down, describing Hannah's condition. Expert doctors confidently pinpoint mistreatment. And Lindsay's own words boomerang back at her at every angle. The jury sees a puzzle whose pieces slot together in a horrifying image of a child brutalized under the watch of a caregiver that she was supposed to trust. After 2 weeks of intense testimony, the jury was handed the daunting task of deciding Lindsay Parton's fate. They retired to the deliberation room with binders of evidence, reams of medical records, conflicting witness accounts, and most damningly, Lindsay's own shifting statements. For the families on both sides, it was a tense wait.
Time seemed to stretch endlessly in this courtroom. In the hallways, attorneys paced. Lindsay herself probably fought back panic, eyes darting whenever a bailiff walked by. Would the jury see her as a scapegoat, or conclude that she was the source of Hannah's horrific injuries?
After about 12 hours of deliberation, the jurors filed back into the courtroom. Their faces were grim, and a hush fell over the courtroom so heavy you could practically hear people's hearts pounding. The foreperson stood up and in a measured voice read the verdict. I'm going to edit it a bit because there were 6 counts, and many of them were endangering a child. Then there was involuntary manslaughter and, of course, murder. So let's listen.
Jury verdict form 1. As to count 1 of the indictment, endangering children in violation of Ohio Revised Code Section 2919.22, subsection B2. We, the duly impaneled jury, do find the defendant Lindsay Parton guilty, and there are 12 signatures reflecting that verdict. Do further find the offense did result in serious physical harm, accompanied by all 12 signatures. As to count 4 of the indictment, involuntary manslaughter, in violation of Ohio Revised Code Section 2903.04, subsection A, we, the duly impaneled jury, do find the defendant Lindsay Parton guilty, accompanied by all 12 signatures. And finally, verdict form 6. As to count 6 of the indictment, murder, in violation of Ohio Revised Code Section 2903.02, subsection B, we, the duly impaneled jury, do find the defendant Lindsay Parton guilty. All 12 signatures accompany the verdict. Ms. Parton, you and your attorneys may have a seat.
There was a ripple of raw emotion that tore through that room.
For many, it was a long anticipated acknowledgement that Hannah's death was not an accident. But the verdict couldn't bring her back. It was a hollow victory, the best form of justice the system could offer, but ultimately unable to heal the gaping wound left by her loss.
A few weeks later, the courtroom reconvened for sentencing. The prosecution painted Lindsay as a cold and violent caregiver who callously shrugged off Hannah's cries. But the defense urged the court to consider Lindsay's otherwise exemplary life: a mother, a former cheerleader, a Girl Scout, someone who had never shown violent tendencies before. But the judge's patience for excuses had worn thin. He sentenced Lindsay to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. In a moment that left few dry eyes, Jason was invited to make a victim impact statement. Standing at the podium, voice trembling, he spoke directly to Lindsay.
My name is Jason Wesche. I'm Hannah's father. You know, you guys heard some speeches here today. I didn't write a speech. I can't even begin to describe the anger that I feel. Obviously, I'm hoping you give her the maximum punishment you can give her. I hope she never gets out of jail for what you did to my daughter. It's unthinkable. I don't even know I don't even know how to begin to describe it. I hope and pray every single day that you get the same treatment in jail that you showed my daughter. That's what I hope for. I hope you sentence her to the max. That's about all I got. I really have nothing else to say.
Hannah's mom, Adrienne, spoke about the loss of her child, and it was heartbreaking to hear.
My name is Adrienne Latham, and I am Hannah's mother. I wrote a letter, so I'm just going to read that. My brave daughter, smart daughter, loving daughter, caring daughter, adventurous daughter, beautiful daughter, strong daughter, charismatic daughter, gone. And I will always miss Hannah Jade with every fiber of my being. I will miss her and long for her until the minute I stop breathing in life as I know it ceases to exist. The night that Hannah Jade died, parts of many other people died as well. Her father, her sisters, her papaw, and I, just to name only a few. In one night, we lost a lifetime of hope, our futures, and parts of our past. I have trouble concentrating. I don't feel right anymore. I have not and never will smile or laugh the same since this tragedy occurred on March 8th, 2000. That's a long time to not feel the same in your own skin, and unfortunately I have to accept the fact that this is only the beginning of the rest of my long and forever changed life. Although memories of Hanny are abundant and wonderful, they are just that. They're memories that were created in the past, and they will forever remain there in the past. I cannot describe the pain that comes along with watching your child suffer, burying your child, and also knowing and having to accept that you will never create another precious moment with your child. Gone. Gone forever. Just like that. Gone. Our precious Hannah was robbed of an entire lifetime. Her family was robbed of an entire lifetime with her. No more birthday parties for Hannah. She will forever be free. That first day of school and putting her on the bus and crying and sobbing all day, anxiously awaiting her return home. No graduations and watching her end one chapter of her life and go on to the next to accomplish and fulfill her destiny. Her father does not get to walk her down the aisle as I look on so proud and elated for my baby girl. No children of her own to raise, so therefore no grandchildren for her father and I. Hannah was taken from us before she even had the chance to live and experience life. My daughter Hannah, I have no doubt, would have accomplished a lot in her lifetime, and I used to dream of the days where I would experience milestones with her. I no longer dream of those days because they are just that, dreams that will never come to fruition, forever non-existent. And accepting my powerlessness over all of this has been the hardest thing to come to terms with. Hannah deserved nothing less than justice. And I hope that when she and I are reunited in the kingdom of heaven, I can kneel before her, wrap my arms around her, look into those beautiful big brown eyes. And have her take comfort in these words, "Mommy's home and I will never leave you again, baby girl."
That was so sad. It was so sad because no child should be taken away like that. And once Lindsay was taken into custody, the swirl of media coverage kicked into overdrive. News outlets showed clips of the trial, photos of Hannah, and debates going back and forth about what really happened. For Jason, the aftermath was quieter, yet painful. A new normal without Hannah's voice echoing in the house. For Lindsay's friends and family, the fight was just beginning because many believed she was innocent, or at least not solely responsible for Hannah's death. But the law had spoken. Lindsay Parton was convicted. Her fate was sealed behind bars for the foreseeable future. Yet one question lingered among some onlookers. Was there more to this story? Could others have shared blame? And that uncertainty would fuel the next chapter, appeals and ongoing controversies. And it would keep Hannah's case alive well beyond the sentencing. There's even a Facebook page dedicated to Lindsay's innocence, and also a YouTuber that has created content and pointed out photos she came across from when Hannah was only a year old. And you could clearly see bruises on her collarbone, 2 to be exact, one lighter than the other. So in different stages of healing. And this was well before Lindsay had ever met little Hannah and when she was only in the care of her father, Jason. Interesting. But I don't know if that will ever be explored in more depth. And we don't want to go too far into the appeals process or any of that. We know that most defendants appeal their cases, and Lindsay's attorneys tried that as well. But the appellate judges upheld her conviction, stating the defense's alternative theories didn't override the powerful medical testimony.
And despite these rulings, Lindsay's supporters continue to champion her cause on social media. They argue the timeline is too tight. The bruises could be explained by other factors like Hannah's headaches or possible hepatitis C effects. And they insist that Lindsay was scapegoated by the system. They focus on small inconsistencies like Jason's false Walmart trip or his friend Chris being around.
They're trying to show that it builds a narrative of reasonable doubt. However, medical experts remain firm. The brutality of Hannah's injuries cannot be explained away by minor bumps or pre-existing conditions. Lindsay's own confessions to physically disciplining Hannah, slapping her, poking her, even uppercutting her, suggest a pattern of behavior that preceded the fatal incident. Amid the ongoing debates, we find out 6 months after Lindsay's conviction, her husband, Timothy J. Smith, TJ, was arrested on charges of violating a child under the age of 10. I'm saying it in much more tame manner. He later faced lesser charges, but the details were very disturbing, leading many to wonder if Lindsay had concealed more than Hannah's mistreatment. Some people speculated that maybe she was protecting TJ all along, and others believed it was unrelated. And it is questionable for sure, but birds of a feather flock together, as they say. Whatever the truth, TJ's criminal case cast a harsher light on Lindsay's home environment It fueled even more gossip. Was that household rife with secrecy, or was Lindsay genuinely unaware of TJ's behavior? All the while, Hannah's family stands against any notion that Lindsay's conviction was unjust. They remind the public of the brutal autopsy photos, the heartbreak of losing a bright, lovable 3-year-old, and so the debate rages on, with no sign of resolution that could please both sides. The story began with a simple premise: a father dropping off his young daughter at a neighbor's daycare, a mundane daily routine in countless families. But behind that routine lurked a nightmare. Hannah had already overcome so many challenges that most children don't even have to face in their lifetime. Yet she couldn't survive a caretaker's mistreatment.
It really puts into perspective the trust that we place in others to protect our children can be shattered in an instant. Child mistreatment isn't always about strangers in dark alleys. Sometimes it wears friendly faces of a neighbor, a friend, or a babysitter who seems to do everything right until the evidence tells a darker story. But looking back on this case, it's easy to wonder how such a horror could unravel without anyone stepping in. But most parents want to believe the best in others. Many caregivers appear trustworthy until they're not.
Listen to your instincts. When something feels wrong, keep lines of communication open with your child, and don't let financial pressure or convenience silence any nagging doubts. Sometimes that uneasy feeling could save a life.
And let's remember, at the heart of this tragedy was a little girl, Hannah Wesche. She was 3 years old. She liked collecting rocks, dancing, and hugging her dad goodbye just a few extra times.
Thank you so much for being here for Hannah's story. And as always, stay safe, trust your gut, and remember, if you see something amiss, especially where a vulnerable child is concerned, speak up, because you might be the only voice that they had. And your support and the support we get from our sponsors make videos like these possible. So please don't forget to check out our sponsor for today, which was June's Journey, who helped make this video possible. You can download the game through the link below or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video. Bye.